Good morning, America. Good afternoon, Europe. Welcome to day 3 of the World Prosperity Forum, hosted by my organization, the Heartland Institute. We are streaming live from Zurich, Switzerland. Davos is in the news so much, but we're here in Zurich for a reason. In Davos, just down the road, all week long is the World Economic Forum, where we have the globalist elites flying in on their private jets, driving around in their black limousines, and then telling the rest of us how we need to change our lifestyles in order to have a sustainable future. But here at the World Prosperity Forum, just up the road in Zurich, we are presenting an alternative based on freedom, the prosperity, and just the human quality of life benefits of a free society. It's important to keep in mind where we've been and where we are, because where Davos would take us, where the World Economic Forum would take us, is a totally different world today. But we have recently seen glimpses of what it would be like. So let's go back a few years for context and compare the World Economic Forum's vision, the globalist socialist vision, versus the freedom vision. For context, just recently, many of you may recall in 2009, after Barack Obama won election to president of the United States, there was an article in Newsweek, the front cover story with the title, "We're all socialists now." Well, 15 years later, how's that working out? The American people, the global community have spoken. Socialism has failed. Socialism is not the future. People have spoken. Freedom is rising. Socialism is on the decline. If we fast forward a little bit, we recently had another taste of that socialist vision under the Biden-Harris administration. And it's amazing. That was just a year ago. A year ago yesterday, in America, we were still under the Biden-Harris governance. And it's easy to forget just where we were. Remember, for example, COVID authoritarianism. The government forcing of shutdown of businesses, small businesses, private businesses, family businesses. In my small town, I saw several such businesses forced to close their doors. They wanted to remain open. Government shut them down. People's dreams, their entire future, their life savings were devastated and destroyed, all in the name of COVID authoritarianism, giving government the power to dictate how we live our lives in its utmost form. We had the enforced lockdowns, the business shutdowns. It was snowflake utopia. Having young people with their blue and purple hair telling you to pull up your mask a little bit to cover your nose. If you don't do so, I actually had policemen summoned because I was walking around outdoors in a public place with my mask a little below my nostril. And I wouldn't put it up when the little 22-year-old got right up in my face and said, "You have to do it." COVID, lockdowns, snowflake utopia, that is the globalist socialist vision. Remember, it took a court order to end the COVID mask mandates on airplanes. Under the vision that is being promoted just down the road in Davos, if those leaders are still in charge, we'd still probably have to wear those masks, even today. Because in late 2022, COVID was essentially over for what it was. We learned that it was not the Spanish flu like we were told it was going to be. We learned that it was mostly the old and people who had morbid conditions, yet still the mask mandates remained. And the politicians in the globalist community, those who subscribed to the leftist globalist ideology, were never going to take them down. It took a court order. It took the United States Supreme Court to block Joe Biden's mandate that would require anybody working for a medium or large company, which is most of the people in America, to either get the vaccine or wear a mask at all times in the workplace and submit themselves to weekly testing. Just a few years ago, that's what we had to endure. It took another court order to block Joe Biden's mandate that any federal employee, in order to keep their job, had to get the vaccination. Vaccination, of course, I put in quotation marks because it wasn't really vaccination. But nevertheless, that's the America we so recently lived in. That's the world without freedom. That's the world that voters rejected so strongly just a year ago. But it extended far beyond that. The Biden administration openly bragging about how they were giving orders to big tech to censor any points of view that they disagreed with. You had Facebook and other social media sites that would deplatform people if they questioned the narrative that COVID evolved naturally and wasn't the result of laboratory experiments gone wrong or leaked inappropriately. You were deplatformed if you questioned the notion that maybe wind turbines weren't environmentally friendly. I know people have had that happen to them. This is a world that we recently lived in which the government colluded with corporations to tell us what we could say, what we could think, what we can do. The corporate oligarchy working with the federal government for ESG standards, environmental, sustainability, and governance, environmental, social, and governance standards. Here we had the largest corporations working in conjunction with the federal government to debank people, to debank companies that they didn't like. You couldn't get insurance if you were in the wrong industry. You need insurance to run your business. This is the world that right now they're trying to reinstall down the road in Davos. Not only was ESG an end run around democracy, the whole goal of ESG is to force the American people through the need to participate in economic activity to do what the left wants. The goal was to do it through the corporations because the American people wouldn't stomach it. The American people wouldn't vote for it. It was an end run around democracy. We can't get politicians who will do that and still remain in office. So let's make it impossible to compete in the economic realm. Let's use these corporations working with government to do what government cannot do on its own. There was talk at the time to do the same thing, the same type of COVID authoritarianism in the name of a climate emergency. This was openly discussed, and according to media reports, Joe Biden was this close. He was on the verge to signing a climate emergency, giving the federal government all the powers, and even more so that they had under COVID, to fight climate change and to shut down opposition. According to reports, the only reason he didn't sign that into law when he was just days away was because he heard from his political consultants that the American people were going to rebel and that he would lose a tremendous amount of popular support. So for political reasons, hopefully that didn't happen. But again, that shows the narrative. Although socialism, although collectivism, authoritarianism is in many cases still a threat, we always have to be vigilant. Still, the forces of freedom, the power of the American people were strong enough to overcome that. Freedom is rising because all those restrictions, all those impositions, all those totalitarian impulses have been defeated. Now they're defeated for now. We have to keep fighting the battle, but freedom is rising. And we live in a world today that is so much better, so much freer because the American people understood what was going on. I have tremendous faith in the American people. Freedom is rising. But it's not just in America. It's in Europe and throughout the globe. Freedom is rising. Freedom is rising in America and throughout the world. For example, we see just down the road in Davos right now, there are things that they won't say that they so recently did say. The phrase, "You'll own nothing and you will be happy." That used to be what Davos, the World Economic Forum, that was their slogan. They put that out on videos, promoted it on the internet. They wanted to promote this vision that now they've tucked it away. They've taken that video down. They don't want people to see it. They still believe in it. But freedom is rising in America, in Europe, throughout the world, because people understand that's garbage. That's not how we want to live our lives. You will own nothing and you will be happy used to be, for them, the public messaging that they wanted to convey. Now it's a badge of shame that they run away from. Similarly, just before COVID hit, the World Economic Forum announced with great fanfare that they were going to be promoting the Great Reset of capitalism. And what they called the Great Reset of capitalism was saying that The owners of a company no longer decide what that company does and how it operates. It's the stakeholders. It's, in other words, anyone who can claim to be affected by what that company does, who will now dictate what the company does. So in other words, if you claim that you are triggered by something the company does, if you claim that there is some type of environmental impact, real or imagined, you get the say. It's socialism. Now, they began with great fanfare using the term the Great Reset of capitalism. Then, because freedom is rising, because people in Europe and elsewhere do see the light and will stand up to oppose it, the World Economic Forum shortened that. The messaging just became the Great Reset. They didn't want you to know that they were taking on capitalism. In other words, economic freedom. The Great Reset was catchier. It was something that maybe people could, without understanding what it is, okay, I support that. Let's reset. Let's have this new beginning. Now they don't even say the Great Reset. They've buried that like their video about you'll own nothing and you will be happy. They've buried it because freedom is rising. They've buried it because the human spirit will not tolerate being kept down, shut down, and oppressed. They're still fighting for it. That's still their agenda. That's still what they're talking about in Davos today and all week long. But they can't do so openly. And that, my friends, is a sign. It's a symbol. More than a symbol, it is the fruits of freedom. It is the victory that is occurring in America and around the world. Freedom is rising. It's a hard struggle. It's one that we'll lose if we give up that fight, if we don't fight as hard as we can. But it's one we are winning, and we'll continue to win. We see the evidence of freedom rising throughout Europe, as in America. In the United Kingdom on Monday, I missed day one of the World Prosperity Forum because I was having a lunch with Nigel Farage and some other prominent figures, political figures in the United Kingdom. And the reason why that was so important is because you look at the polling. A year and a half ago, the Reform Party, an upstart new party, I mean, all of the inherent challenges and obstacles you have to overcome if you're even going to be in the same league as the Tories and the Labour Party. A little over a year ago, Reform Party surpassed both parties in the polls. And the message was grassroots populist conservatism. And by populism, that means the people actually dictating, determining, steering the course for your party, for your government, for your society. And they said when Nigel Farage and Reform UK took the lead in the polls, they said, well, this is just a blip. This is just frustration with the Starmer Labour Party. Well, yeah, there is a lot of frustration with that because they're pursuing the same policies as Davos. But nevertheless, a year and a half later, Reform continues to extend its lead. And the reason why that makes me happy is because Reform stands for the same freedom principles that we do here at the World Prosperity Forum. Freedom is rising. Freedom will likely soon be victorious in the United Kingdom, where people have seen socialism, they've seen the world of Davos, and they are rejecting it. It's not just the UK. In Austria, the Freedom Party leads the polls there as well. In fact, they had the most seats in the Austrian parliament in recent elections, or at least the most votes. In Austria, it is freedom that is prevailing over the statist EU ruling elites class. It goes beyond Austria. In Poland, we have some Polish speakers here today, fantastic speakers. And their country recently had a setback when one of the leftist Davos-type folks won the prime minister election a couple of years ago. But just in the past several months, they had a presidential election. And in the presidential election, it was the Law and Justice Party candidate who won. Freedom prevailed over the Davos vision. Going beyond Austria, going beyond Poland. In France, in Germany, in Romania, where they had to cancel elections because the freedom candidate was leading. In countries throughout Europe, it is the party that is most embracing freedom and our values that leads the polls, that is poised to take power if they don't have power already. It's a wonderful time to be alive. It's a hard fight. It is a fight that we can lose if we take our foot off the pedal, but it's a fight that we're winning. Freedom is rising. I can assure you that all of the folks here at the World Prosperity Forum We'll do everything we can do to make sure that that victory that we have now is not temporary. It's not illusory. It's permanent. And for our viewing audience, for all of you out there, with your help, we will fulfill that goal. Freedom is rising. Now, one of the things at Davos that is a little bit concerning is it's not just the discussions that you see on camera. They will have videos that they will shoot and they will post on the internet, and they'll talk with these corporate moguls and world political leaders and their visions. And of course, they put it in the best possible formatting and public relations for their globalist socialist vision. But it's what goes on behind the scenes. It's in Davos where you have these heavy hitters that come together and they map out their plans, their strategies. How are we winning? How are we losing? How can we change that? But guess what? We're doing that here too. Here at the World Prosperity Forum, we have movement leaders from Hungary, from Poland, from the Netherlands, from the UK, you name it. If I'm forgetting some, please forgive me. Even this morning, getting together with my friends from Poland and discussing agriculture policy and other important issues in Poland to preserve freedom, to preserve the rights and the prosperous future of the Polish people. And those discussions that I'm having, and not just me, but people are having with each other here, that's going to provide the ammunition, the momentum for that change to be permanent. One of the conversations I had, as I mentioned, with some of the Polish delegates here, tremendously promising. And I met with 4 folks, but 2 of them will be speaking here after me. So I'd like to introduce you to them. The first speaker is Tomasz Obzanski. Tomasz Obzanski is a Polish farmer. He's an entrepreneur and a social activist. Very importantly, he's an advisor, actually the preeminent advisor to the President of the Republic of Poland on agricultural affairs. He's the chairman of the independent farmers trade union, Solidarity. In this role, he engages in discussions at the national and European levels addressing issues of food security, the protection of agricultural land, support for family farms, and the development of organic farming. In 2024, during a protest in Brussels, he initiated the creation of Solidarity of European Farmers, not just Polish, but European farmers, a platform for cooperation between agricultural organizations from various countries, which has been welcomed with recognition by European agricultural communities. As the leader of the agricultural trade union Solidarity, he participates in work on legislative solutions for rural areas and agriculture. In his work, he combines practical experience as a farmer with knowledge and the ability to engage in social dialogue. He particularly emphasizes the need to create long-term strategies that respond to the challenges of global competition, the Green Deal, climate change. He cultivates values rooted in the Catholic religion and the tradition of Polish family farms, hard work, solidarity, and responsibility for future generations. Also with him presenting is Mariusz Zagorski. He is an academic, a public relations specialist, a political advisor, entrepreneur, former speechwriter to the president of Poland, Andrzej Duda. On behalf of the Polish government, he was responsible for organizing the 3rd European Games in Krakow Malopolska in 2023. As a board advisor to the independent farmers trade union Solidarity, he focuses mainly on finding connections between farmers and entrepreneurs from different countries and on supporting technology transfer. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Tomasz Obzanski and Mariusz Zagorski.
Dzień dobry Państwu.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Bardzo się cieszę, że jestem na tej konferencji. Dziękuję Jamesowi.
I'm very glad to be here at this conference.
Institutowi-
Thank you very much to James for the invitation.
Instytutowi Heartlanda, że jesteśmy tutaj dzisiaj i w tak miłym w towarzystwie i takiej atmosferze możemy mówić o Polsce, o polskiej żywności, o racji stanu, która z tego wynika.
And to the Heartland Institute, we are glad and happy that we can be here with you and that we can talk about Polish agriculture, about Polish food policy, agricultural policy, and everything which is important to us.
Jestem przewodniczącym Solidarności Rolników Indywidualnych. Jest to związek z bardzo długimi tradycjami, który walczył o żywność, walczył o ziemię, walczył o to, żeby to bezpieczeństwo żywnościowe było tą polską racją stanu.
I'm the chairman of the Polish Union of Farmers Solidarity, an organization with a great history, organization which fought for the rights, for preserving farmers' rights, for preserving the right to own land in Poland, and to have our own food and preserve our own food security.
Bezpieczeństwo żywnościowe jest kluczowym elementem bezpieczeństwa państwa i trzeba powiedzieć dzisiaj, że polscy rolnicy, nie tylko polscy rolnicy, protestują i w Brukseli, teraz protestowali w Strasburgu o to, aby zachować te polskie gospodarstwa i europejskie gospodarstwa, żeby budować tę europejską solidarność, żeby ta żywność europejska była na europejskich stołach.
So food security is crucial for general security, for preserving our independence. So that's why Polish and European farmers are protesting now in Brussels and in Europe to preserve Polish and European agriculture and to keep our food security.
No, trzeba powiedzieć, że dzisiaj jest bardzo duże zagrożenie napływem taniej żywności bez żadnych standardów z krajów Ameryki Łacińskiej, z krajów Mercosur, tak jak też jest napływ żywności ze wschodu, z Ukrainy, gdzie polscy rolnicy mają z tym bardzo duży problem, no i muszą robić wszystko, żeby konkurować z tą tańszą żywnością.
So there is a big threat now of low quality food coming from the Latin America, from Mercosur countries, but also from Ukraine, and Polish and European farmers, especially Polish, are struggling to compete with these products, which are cheaper but of considerably lower quality.
I tak się stało też, że na proteście w Strasburgu dwóch naszych aresztowano i musimy jakoś im teraz pomagać i wyciągnąć ich z aresztu, bo no, w tej walce no, są trochę tymi ofiarami, które tymi bohaterami, którzy walczą o żywność europejską, o tą normalność, która powinna być w naszych gospodarstwach.
Yesterday in Strasbourg, there were two members of Solidarity Union. They were arrested during the protests. We are trying to help them because we are our heroes. They are fighting not only on behalf of farmers, but also they fight for better food and food security for everyone.
A bezpieczeństwo żywnościowe jest tak samo ważne jak bezpieczeństwo militarne, czy bezpieczeństwo energetyczne, czy bezpieczeństwo infrastrukturalne. Także to jest to, o co walczymy.
Food security is equally important as military security or security of infrastructure. We believe it's equally important, and we need to do everything to preserve it.
A trzeba powiedzieć, że Polska posiada bardzo dobre gleby, produkuje dobrą żywność, robi to naprawdę dobrze. Polscy rolnicy są, można powiedzieć, takimi osobami, które potrafią wyprodukować dobrze, potrafią produkować tanio. Tego się nauczyli, to mają we krwi.
So Poland has good conditions for farming. We have a good soil, good climate, and we also know how to produce high quality food. Polish farmers are really good in that, and they can provide really healthy and good quality food for other countries.
Trzeba powiedzieć, że polscy rolnicy nie mieli łatwego startu, jak rolnicy z Niemiec, z Holandii, z Francji, gdzie mieli łatwiej, mieli dopłaty, byli w Unii Europejskiej, nie będąc, musieliśmy umieć produkować dobrze, tanio i zdrowo i tak to zostało. Jest to w naszej tożsamości, dlatego to, co dzisiaj Polska potrafi wyprodukować i jak potrafi to zrobić ekologicznie, bo trzeba powiedzieć, że Polska stosuje najmniej środków ochrony roślin, najmniej substancji czynnych w Europie.
So it was not easy for us to compete with other countries which were members of the European Union before and enjoyed the finances of European Union in times of its prosperity. It was not easy for us to enter the market, but we succeeded with that. And what we are particularly proud of is that Polish food is of quite high quality, and we have a lowest level of use of chemical substances in farming in Europe.
Dlatego jesteśmy dumni z tego, że polska żywność jest i może być bardziej eksportowana do krajów zachodnich, do krajów Ameryki, na Bliski Wschód, tam gdzie jest potrzebna, bo jest zdrowa, jest bez pozostałości pestycydów i możemy nią się chwalić, możemy szczycić. To jest takie nasze dobro narodowe, którego nie można zniszczyć, które musi być przekazywane też innym krajom, gdzie mogą z tego korzystać i cieszyć się tym dobrym smakiem, aromatem, bo ten mikroklimat, który jest w Polsce, sprawia, że ta żywność jest wyjątkowa.
So we are proud that we can deliver best quality food to other countries, to other regions, including Latin America, Asia, Middle East, you name it, and that our food is of good quality, and also good taste, because our conditions enable us to produce a really tasty food and good products also in that sense.
Trzeba powiedzieć, że państwo, które karmi innych, buduje stabilność, zaufanie i trwałe relacje polityczne. Polska żywność staje się taką marką narodową, instrumentem bezpieczeństwa międzynarodowego. Fundamentem tej naszej siły też są skrócone łańcuchy dostaw, które powodują, że ta żywność jest sprzedawana szybciej, że nie ma pośredników i o to też walczymy, bo musimy zrobić wszystko, żeby w Polsce odzyskać też i handel, i przetwórstwo, bo niestety czasy transformacji spowodowały, że z tym jest problem, nie mamy swojego, tak jak w handlu, nie mamy swojego przetwórstwa i z tym sobie też musimy poradzić. Dzięki temu cieszę się, że jesteśmy na tej konferencji, bo to dodaje takiej siły, takiej wiary w to, że można zmienić szereg rzeczy i możemy tutaj jako Polacy, jako Europejczycy robić wszystko, żeby po prostu mieć to swoje, żeby to było nasze.
So as a country which can feed other countries, we build on it in terms of our relationships, our foreign policy, and we also treasure this food market and agriculture as our trademark. So we are also, care to shorten the delivery chains so that the food would be delivered as soon as possible, fresh and healthy.
Trzeba powiedzieć, że rolnik XXI wieku jest strażnikiem suwerenności, strażnikiem tego, że możemy być tymi, którzy dbają o to bezpieczeństwo żywnościowe w kraju.
So farmers are also considered as those who guard sovereignty and who keep security, food security for the whole country. So we consider farmers very important for the whole national policy.
Dlatego będąc tutaj i wsłuchując się w te dyskusje, w te rozmowy, przekażę moim kolegom rolnikom to, żebyśmy mogli jeszcze bardziej działać i działać na tej takiej niwie tego, że będziemy mogli mocniej i walczyć, ale też i dbać o te nasze rodzinne gospodarstwa, których jest dużo i które są tą polską racją stanu, są tym elementem, który sprawia, że polski rolnik produkuje zdrowo, dobrze, produkuje dużo. Mimo tych problemów, które dzisiaj mamy, to będziemy robić wszystko, aby to bezpieczeństwo żywnościowe było tą polską racją stanu.
So after all these discussion I've heard here, I'm strongly convinced that we can work together for our common prosperity, and I will tell it to my fellow colleagues, farmers in Poland, and encourage them to cooperate and work together for food security in Poland, but also across the world.
Też jesteśmy na spotkaniach komitetów Kopa-Koczeka. Kopa-Koczeka to jest organizacja, która zrzesza wszystkich rolników Unii Europejskiej, organizacje rolnicze, gdzie wspólnie rozmawiamy i rozwiązujemy problemy. Chociaż jest tak, że to Polska nadaje ten ton i sprawia, że jesteśmy tym krajem, gdzie jest dużo tych małych gospodarstw rodzinnych, które są tym elementem gospodarki, który tak napędza całe państwo.
So we are also members of Copa-Cogeca organization, which includes and gathers and connects farmers organization across Europe, across the European Union. But I have to say that it's Poland that's leading in this organization, and we are those who set the agenda.
Także trzeba robić wszystko, żeby ta żywność była dobra. Nie tak jak się mówi, że marchewka w Polsce rośnie wolniej jak wołowina w Brazylii.
So we need to do everything what is possible to make the food of good quality and healthy. There is a joke that in Poland carrots grow slower than beef in Brazil, so that's unacceptable.
Tak, albo tutaj odnosząc się do śladu węglowego, no polskie czy nasze krowy mają większy ślad węglowy jak krowa, która płynie statkiem z krajów Mercosuru, z Brazylii, z Argentyny.
It also includes carbon emission, carbon dioxide emission. So certainly a cow who is raised in Poland and sold in Europe has a lower carbon emission than the one which is transported from Latin America.
Także proszę Państwa, cieszę się, że tutaj jesteśmy, że rozmawiamy, że jest ta normalność i tą normalność musimy wyzwalać u nas w naszych krajach, abyśmy mogli normalnie żyć, mieć swoją własność, mieć swoje gospodarstwa, swoje rodziny, żeby było tak, jak powinno być, a nie to, co dzisiaj jest przedstawiane, te ideologie, które tak naprawdę nie powinny mieć nigdzie miejsca.
So certainly something that unites us is a common sense, and that's something we should preserve, opposing to ideologies which are usually against it.
Ja ze swojej strony bardzo serdecznie dziękuję. Mariusz poprowadzi dalszą prezentację, którą razem robiliśmy i będziemy dalej kontynuować nasze dyskusje, nasze rozmowy.
Thank you very much for your attention. Tomasz kindly asked me to follow up with presentation we prepared for you together. We did it together for you. Thank you very much.
Dziękuję.
Thank you once again for the invitation. It's really an honor for us and for me personally to be here and to speak to you and to all who watch us on YouTube during this streaming. We are here to tell you a story. A story which begins after the Second World War, and it starts with a very simple fact, if I may ask for the first slide. And this fact is that after the Second World War, Polish farmers successfully resisted collectivization, which later enabled the overthrow of communism, as simple as that. Communists everywhere were trying to take land from the people. And in Poland, Polish people opposed so heavily to it that they simply felt not strong enough to do it. We were the only country, communist country in Europe that actually preserved individual farming and family-owned farms as the main model of food production. So what was the effect? Communists simply could not starve us to death like they did, for example, in Ukraine before the 1930s, during the so-called big famine. Of course, they were trying. We have a poster here, communist propaganda poster. We were talking here a lot about targeting young people with leftist, communist, socialist, globalist propaganda. That's what this poster is actually doing, because the text here is addressed directly to young people. This claim and is trying to encourage young people to fight for the better socialist countryside. So it's actually targeting young people, just like today ideologies do it. So I'm bringing up this fact because it was really crucial for the fall of communism and for regaining independence. At the same time, may I ask for the next slide? At the same time, in the United States, we had a president who understood this very well. It was Harry Truman, seen here, speaking to farmers, American farmers in Dexter, Iowa, in September 1948, and saying this: in a very real sense, the abundant harvest of this country are helping to save the world from communism. Communism thrives on human misery, and the crops you are producing are driving back the tide of misery in many lands. Your farms are a vital element in America's foreign policy. Keep that in mind. That is of vital importance to us and to the world. These are words of Harry Truman addressing American farmers in Iowa, but it also worked for us in Poland. And that's why when may I have next, please? When in 1980, in summer 1980, the Solidarity movement was created as a workers' union. We have the famous Solidarity logo here. Shortly after that, a couple of months later, in May 1981, Next, please. The Solidarity Union of Individual Farmers was created also as well. So the Union of Individual Farmers, Union of agricultural solidarity. And it was very crucial because thanks to the fact that people owned the land, could produce their own food, could supply their families, their relatives with food, communists could not react in the way they usually did, creating shortages of food. And of course they were trying, but it was ineffective because we had individual farming. And then next, please. In 1987, John Paul II came to Poland and made this statement, speaking to Polish farmers in the city of Tarnów. I think there is one thing you probably should know about John Paul II. So he was, of course, a Catholic priest. He was a bishop. He was the Pope. But he was also an academic. And in his research as an academic, his field of research was not so much theology, so not so much religion, although it had all this religious background, but it was rather philosophy. And his main field of research was Marxism. So he was a great expert in Marxism, which made him also, of course, a great critic of it, right? So he knew that communism will collapse. He knew that the changes across the corner. Remember, it's 1987, well before the fall of communism, but he's coming to Poland and says this: the model of the peasant or peasant worker working with little effect and beyond his strength should be replaced by the model of the efficient and independent producer, conscious and able to use, no less than others, cultural assets and capable of multiplying them. So the model of peasant we had at that time should be replaced by the model of efficient and independent, two crucial words, producer, agricultural producer. So we did that homework in last 30 years. It was a tough road and it was a lot of work. And I'm proud to be here and speak on behalf of, thousands of or millions of Polish farmers who did this work, actually. And we moved from this model of small farms to model of still family-owned based agricultural production, but a really modern and effective one. So that leads us to the current situation. We are the leader on many fields when it comes to food production. Here you have just one example. So these are exporters, the main world exporters of frozen fruits. So as you can see, Poland is the biggest one exporter of frozen fruits. There are many other examples. So we are the biggest European poultry producer. We are leading on many other things, in many other areas, like apples, for example. Here is we are the one of 3 biggest apple exporters. You have some, next please, if you can switch the slide. And to the right, you have also a chart showing that we are also making happy climate alarmists, because things we produce a lot, like poultry or apples, cause a really low carbon carbon emission. So we produce a lot of food, we produce it of good quality, and we export it to all the world. But there is more than this. Next, please. So we really want to partner with and to bring sustainable farming to the world. So we partner with many countries. We support development of agricultural farming in many, many regions in the world. Here we have examples of berry trade, berry industry. We are very strong in berries, and we support actually the production of berries also in, for instance, in Latin American countries like Chile or Peru. So it's complementary because berries, you cannot. The condition of storage are difficult and so on. So it's complementary. They supplied berries for us when there is a winter in Poland and you cannot pick them up here, and then we send our berries there, and we cooperate. We partner in that on a really, really high level. Next, please. We have our own brands when it comes to food production and food industry. There are some really nice examples like this brand D-Wine. It's a small winery founded by really nice young couple we are seeing on the photo. But what I wanted to show you is how these brands, these entrepreneurs contribute to local community and the community in general, because they not only produce wine, but they also teach other people how to produce wine. Or they organize neighborhood events, right? So they share their experience, they share their attitude, and they, of course, create sustainable businesses, because that's also an important aspect of it. If I may ask for the next slide. But we are also developing new technologies, like very sophisticated bio fertilizers produced in a very innovative way, very effective. Next, please. Which we sell and export, for example, to China. Yes, we do export to China, and it's a great success. Or next, please, to Africa. Here you can see the founder during some talks in Angola. It's a country we partner a lot with when it comes to agriculture. Next, please. We have a company which developed nanofluids. So nanosilver fluids which can replace chemical pesticides. What a great news for the German chemical industry. They won't have to do it anymore. And next, please. These products we also spread across the world, helping other countries to develop their agriculture. This photo was taken last week. They just signed an agreement and will build a factory in Ethiopia. So this is the point. Next, please. More than that, there is more than that, because we are also hoping to launch very soon our own satellites constellation to facilitate precision farming, not only in Poland, but also in the whole region. That's a really advanced project, and it's going to be launched really soon, hopefully, and will make our agriculture, our food production even more effective. So we really want to contribute to the world prosperity, not in a way that we want to exploit other countries, selling them low quality chemicals or whatsoever. We develop really advanced technology. When it comes to these satellites, of course, they are driven by Polish AI as well. So there was a discussion on Monday here whether AI is a threat or an opportunity. So it becomes less threat and more opportunity when you have your own artificial intelligence. And we are lucky enough to have a very good programmists in Poland. ChatGPT was actually designed and engineered by two guys from Poland. It's officially acknowledged by the OpenAI. So we can create our own artificial intelligence to drive project like this, and we also think that's one of our, it's a fundamental thing for the independence, because that's obvious that algorithms, artificial intelligence are tool of control and tool of power, and to remain independent, you need to create your own. Next, please. There are also, of course, there are some challenges and threats. We analyze them. We have the Technical University of Warsaw. We have a great team of researchers, interdisciplinary researchers, who work on great research studying globally and also in Poland. And so they created this chart, or this matrix of Poland agri-food security, pointing out some great challenges like cost model exhaustion, like lack of this tax sovereignty. We're still, dealing with that. Hydrological shortage. We are, unfortunately, Poland is a country which has a shortage of water. Like hostile takeovers, or rural depopulation, or retailer pressure, very important, and considerable factor. We are also monitoring global threats and challenges for food market. Next, please. And these are, well-known: water resources, but also genetic monopolization. We were working on this as well, developing our own genetic material at our universities. We have special farming universities, agricultural universities in Poland that which work on that. Currency fragmentation. So the energy price volatility, and so on. So these are global problems. But if I may ask for the next slide, it shows European Union agri-food risks. And this is absolutely amazing, because most of them, if you look at this chart, most of them are actually created by the policy of the European Union, because these are risks like regulatory disarmament, or uncontrolled imports, demographic aging, resource dependency, hybrid price war, bureaucracy, capital outflow, or profitability drop. So these are all. So most of these dangers or challenges in the European Union are created by the European Union itself, but by the European Union policy, and that's really a sad thing, because we are being apparently governed by troublemakers, and that's a real problem, and we need to do something about it. Good news is that we have some successes on that. May I have the next slide, please? But the most recent threat to the Polish agricultural market and the food production in Poland and in whole Europe is, of course, the Mercosur agreement. You can see now the announcement from France 24. It's saying EU and Mercosur bloc sign landmark free trade deal after 25 years of negotiations. So the European Union and Mercosur bloc of South African countries signed on Saturday a free trade deal that follows a quarter century of careful negotiations. We prefer rather to call it forging this deal. It's negotiations is like a very little joke. Good news is that today it was blocked by the European Parliament after protests yesterday. As you know, unfortunately, two our members were arrested during this protest, but by the majority of, I think, 10 votes, the Mercosur agreement was at least for now blocked by the European Parliament, and that's a good news. What's so bad about it? Because this is a fundamental question. What's bad about it? A trade agreement. Of course, we let's have an example here. Next, please. Here we have a list of countries, major countries, which secured the protection of designation of origin, right? And there are 340 products protected, which designation of origin is protected in this agreement. 63 are from France, 59 are from Spain, 57 from Italy, and 27 from Germany. Frankly, we all know expressions like désignation d'origine protégée or denominazione d'origine protetta. But I do speak German quite well, but I don't know how to say in German. How to say it in German? It's ich weiß es nicht. But apparently we will now going to learn. Right? How about Poland? You can now guess how many products on trademarks Poland have secured, unless you don't watch the presentation. Don't see the presentation. So two products we secured. Our wonderful leftist government secured 2 products, and there are 2 because there are 2 different types of vodka. Just to make sure that we still will have to explain to other people in the world that Poland is not Russia, right? So we do have our other products. We do have many regional products which are worth to be protected, but they are not in this agreement. Next, please. Of course, we owe all this to this young lady. Ursula von der Leyen, and to Germans. So why Germans are so important, and why this was this agreement, this deal, so important that they worked on it, or they spent 25 years working on it. You know, Germans invested a lot of resources in that deal well before they even started negotiated this agreement. Next, please. Here you can see a photo from something called Fazenda Volkswagen in 1973. Volkswagen bought 140,000 hectares in Amazonia and created a huge farm where they exercised human rights abuse, deforestation, exploitation, you name it, for 10 years. It was revealed by a Catholic priest working there. And after the scandal, Volkswagen withdrew just recently. A court trial in Brazil was over on this case. But this is just one example. So Germans acquired a lot of land in Latin America, in Brazil, in Argentina, especially after the Second World War, when many of German Nazis escaped there with money stolen during the war and artworks and other things. But more than that, what's wrong with the food from Mercosur countries? So it contains generally, so average food from Mercosur, average farmers or farms, because there are no farmers that produce this food. There are big farms owned by big capital, by funds and other entities. These farms use 6 times more chemicals that Polish farmers do. So that's the scale of pollution, pollution of soil, pollution of food, which we are dealing with. So where these chemicals come from, that's a question worth asking. They of course come from German chemical industry, right? So these are German chemical companies, corporations that produce these chemicals. Where do fertilizers come in Mercosur countries? Mainly from Russia. So that's the deal. But there is more than that, because as I said, we are studying the Great Reset in Poland quite closely. So it seems that there is an idea of making one region dependent on other regions in a way that you are able, or they are able, to control the whole world, right? So that's why farming in Europe needs to be destroyed in order to make Europe dependent on the food from the Latin America. That's why industrial production needs to be destroyed in Europe in order to make it dependent from China and other regions. So that's the mechanism behind. That's what we believe as the goal, to make the world, to make no region, not only in terms of countries, but no region in terms of continents, independent and sovereign. There are, however, some good news. James named them. Next, please, because recently we had an election, presidential elections in Poland. We have a new president who understands this these issues, and who appointed Tomasz Obszański, the chairman of the Solidarity of Farmers, his advisor on agriculture. And that's a good news, and that gives us a hope, and that gives us also I wouldn't say mandate, but it makes us also encourages us, or that's the right word, encourages us to invite you to work together. We really deliver when it comes to agriculture. We have our own proposals, but we will not do it on our own. We need to work together, and that's our message to you for today. We want to invite you to work together on preserving sustainable farming across the world, because it is under threat across the world on all continents, and we need to preserve it everywhere. And we need to do it globally. We have tools for that. We have enough power, and I believe also we have enough determination. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Mariusz. As Mariusz was waxing poetic about Polish vodka, it called back some rather fond memories. That I can assure you. It actually was a year and a half ago. One of the folks pretty influential with Solidarity had invited me to Krakow and Katowice. And actually the influence of Solidarity impressed me, because he had lined up meetings with policymakers from 3 different Polish parties, all of whom got on the same page with Solidarity and wanted to talk with me about various topics. That was quite impressive to have that cross-party poll. But anyway, so flying to Poland after weeks of being on the road to other places. I love going to Poland. It's one of my favorite places in the world. Nevertheless, I was exhausted after 3 different days, first in Krakow, then to Katowice, back to Krakow. And at the end, I'm thinking, okay, at the end of day 3 meetings, this has been great. And I love my Polish friends. Now I get to get a little sleep. I get to go to bed. But at the end, my Solidarity friend says, okay, James, now you get to experience the real Poland. We're going to go out drinking vodka. and I'm thinking to myself, okay, this is, they're looking forward to being great hosts. This is quite an honor. How do I turn this down without insulting? Because I'm exhausted. And I said, suck it up. You'll be tired. You're going to enjoy it. And I could tell you that night, I'm not typically a vodka drinker. Oh, I was turned on to Polish vodka. So I agree with you. Polish vodka is superior. So if you take nothing else away from that talk, that's what you get. But the Heartland Institute, my organization, has been working with Solidarity for more than a decade. And there are Solidarity branches for the various regions in Poland, for various industries. We have miners, farmers, etc. And Solidarity, first of all, it's such an honor to work with Solidarity, because Solidarity really created the first crack in the Soviet Empire. It was Solidarity, the labor union, that stood up to the full might of the communist world, Russia primarily, but the communist world's military oppression on the docks of Gdansk and then throughout the country. And it was an inspiration to me, even as a teenager growing up in America, to see that. And to take on the Soviet Empire was something, but another incredibly courageous moment for Solidarity back in 2015 when we started working with Solidarity. Solidarity reached out to us at Heartland. And this was at the same time, actually during the signing of the Paris Climate Accords, where this was going to be the the agreement that was finally going to fully effectualize the climate governance of the world. And it was Solidarity that reached out to us and said, Heartland, we want to work with you because we want to fight this. Now, I can tell you one thing. Taking on the full might of the Soviet Empire took quite a bit of courage and was quite dangerous. I'm not so sure if it was as courageous or dangerous as taking on the full might of the United Nations climate establishment, but Solidarity did it both times, and it's been an honor to work with you. With the climate engagement, with Solidarity and others, the policy, one of the policy manifestations of their climate agenda is the net zero agenda. In the United States, it's presented as the Green New Deal. It was presented as a Green New Deal. One of the signs that freedom is rising and we are winning is that in the 2024 presidential elections, Kamala Harris didn't even want to talk about it. She wanted to run away from it, which is fantastic. But here in Europe, for the longest time, my friends would say, James, I'm personally with you, but whether it's Heartland, whether it's our coalition of friends and allies, we cannot and should not be talking about climate change or even the net zero agenda because everybody's on board. Everybody believes in it. We have powerful enemies. We're never going to convince the people. But just as Solidarity showed such courage, taking on the Soviets, taking on the United Nations back in 2015, there are groups here in Europe that are amazing at fighting that same battle. And one of them is Clintel. Marcel Kruk will be our next speaker. He is a president of Clintel. They're a fantastic organization. If you don't know of them, look them up, send me a note, I'll direct you to them. They take on the climate establishment here in Europe the way the Heartland Institute does in the United States. And Marcel is going to tell you a little bit more. They deal with the science, but they also deal with policy and the real world impacts of what the climate establishment would impose on us if they can. And in this case, net zero, the net zero agenda, zero carbon dioxide emissions. So Marcel is going to tell you a little bit about that. And let me tell you a little bit about Marcel. Marcel Kruk is the co-founder of the Climate Intelligence Foundation, hence Clintel. Kruk studied chemistry in Amsterdam and Leiden. In 1997, he became a freelance science journalist after an internship. And in 2001, he became the editor of a technology magazine. In 2003, he became the editor of another technology magazine. Marcel knows his stuff. In February 2005, he published a major and critical article about the hockey stick graph. And the article provoked significant response, and he has been closely following the climate debate ever since. In 2019, Kruk, together with Emeritus Professor Guus Berkhout of Delft University of Technology, founded Clintel. Clintel operates as a think tank and watchdog in the areas of climate change and climate policy. In fact, they are so powerful, they're so compelling. Václav Klaus, who spoke on day 2 of this conference, has recently joined as president of Clintel. He's that impressed with Clintel. He wants to bring his gravitas to that organization. Along with Andy May and a group of researchers from Clintel, Kruk published a book, The Frozen Climate Views of the IPCC. It's a fantastic book. They critique the 6th IPCC report. And today, Kruk is going to critique the net zero agenda in Europe. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you Marcel Kruk.
So, thank you so much, James, for your kind words, and too much honor, I would almost say, but it's great to be here. I actually attended, so my hockey stick article was published in 2005. It gained me some attention from the climate skeptics at the time. Fred Singer, well known, of course, to the audience. And Fred Singer actually invited me for the first Heartland conference back in 2007, 6, what was it? 2007. So I attended the first 2 Heartland conferences in New York. It was a great adventure to go there. And Václav Klaus actually was speaking at the second one, I think. So I saw Václav Klaus for the first time then in New York, and we didn't speak. He was very busy, and yeah. So it's amazing that 20 years later, He is still involved in the debate, and I'm still involved in the debate. I mean, for me, really, it was the hockey stick, because I had like an international scoop debunking this hockey stick, the Michael Mann hockey stick, by the Canadians, McIntyre McKittrick, well-known story. But I had the scoop as a journalist, and I really expected at the time that the IPCC and the community in the Netherlands, the Climate Institute, KNMI, that they really would accept this critique, that they would say, oh, ouch, we made a big mistake not checking this graph. And how naive I was, and when I saw the response that they didn't accept my critique, the critique by McIntyre and McKittrick, that really intrigued me to continue my research. I actually left the magazine that you mentioned, and I worked on climate full-time ever since. It was a battle. It was bad for my career. It was bad for my wallet. I made no money for many years, and thanks to Clintel, I now have a reasonable income. But it was really an uphill battle. And so today, we had Mark Morano speaking on the first day, on Monday, and his talk was actually very positive. All the good things that are happening in the US, and unfortunately, and yesterday, our new president, Václav Klaus, was saying we are not on the winning side. And I think he means by that we in Europe, we are not on the winning side, And for today, I was preparing this talk, and I was focusing on Europe and the climate policy in Europe. And I have to admit that Klaus is probably right. I will give you many examples, mainly from Germany and from the Netherlands, because I am from the Netherlands and I'm most familiar with the situation in the Netherlands. And Germany and the Netherlands are two very important countries in the Netherlands, because we have a lot of financial debt in Southern Europe, like in Italy and Greece, etc. And Europe as a whole is responsible for these debts, and Germany and Holland are the countries paying most. So if the economy collapses in Germany and in the Netherlands, then this is bad news for the whole of Europe. Maybe Poland can save us, because Poland is doing the right stuff, but Germany and the Netherlands and the UK, Liz Truss yesterday spoke about this, they are making very bad choices, and climate policy is dominant. In my opinion, climate policy is dominant in this kind of thing. So I think I have some presentation. I have a presentation, but I think, Jim, we can skip several slides, because James actually already explained a little bit about Clintel. So we can go through the president, Václav Klaus, and then, the World Climate Declaration. So after that, this is an important project by Clintel. So when we were founded in 2019, my co-founder, Guus Berghout, he is a professor in the Netherlands, we decided to publish this World Climate Declaration. You can go to our website clintel.org, and you see we have now more than 2,000 signatories, scientists, experts in the field of engineering and energy, etc., and economists and lawyers. And they agree with us that there is no climate emergency. Actually, a funny story was that in 2019, the European Parliament declared a climate emergency. So there was a majority in the European Parliament declaring a climate emergency. And we were also invited by a few members of Parliament, European Parliament. And so we hosted a session about our World Climate Declaration. And one lady from the UK, a member of Parliament, came there, and she said at a certain point, you, Clintel, are responsible for future manslaughter by saying things like this, and I also remember that the Nobel Prize winner, William Nordhaus from the US, he won the Nobel Prize for climate economy, actually, and he is not a skeptic, but he was in his speech in 2018 in Sweden, in Stockholm, in his Nobel speech, you can watch it online. He was saying that what is the optimum for climate policy, because climate policy will have a cost, but climate change could also have a cost. So as an economist, he was looking for the optimum, and the optimum he reached in his model, at 3.5 degrees Celsius of warming. So way above the Paris targets, and he presented this in Stockholm. So next year, of course, Brussels, they invited him, of course, because climate is so important. No way. They invited Greta Thunberg in Brussels, and they didn't invite William Nordhaus, So this is so typical. This is so typical for Europe. So we continue, Jim. The Clintel World Climate Declaration, you can find it on our website. The assessment by Clintel, James already mentioned, with a group of scientists, you see them here. We analyzed the latest IPCC report, the 6th IPCC report. We worked on this for 2 years because it's really like IPCC report is 1,500 pages, So we did a lot of work and we published this book, The Frozen Climate Views of the IPCC. Go to our website, go to our web shop, clintel.shop, and you see we translated the book in Dutch, in German, in French now. We have a Danish version as well. And so this is the kind of things that Clintel is also trying to do. We are trying to become like a global coordinator of climate realist groups in the world, like working together with the US, with the UK, with the Global Warming Policy Foundation, with EIKE in Germany that you also work with, James. So we are trying to become like an international coordinating center and doing projects like this. Yeah, we should work together on the next IPCC report, AR7, that is upcoming now, in a few years. And so Climate the Movie, this is the next slide, Jim. Climate the Movie is a well-known movie, I think, for the audience. Most of you probably have seen it, but we organized a premiere in the Netherlands with Tom Nelson. Tom Nelson is well known from his podcast, the Tom Nelson Climate Podcast. So Tom Nelson came to the Netherlands and we organized a premiere in the Netherlands. On the next slide. And for the first time, I was surprised that the room we had a theater with 600 places. It was fully booked. And so this is, this is a positive message, at least, that climate realism is growing, I think, in the Netherlands. But yeah, later on I will have some bad news about this as well, unfortunately. And so my last slide about Clintel is that we are becoming a worldwide organization. Later this year, you will see that in several countries, people will start to organize, like they start like Clintel Hungary, or they start Clintel Italy, or Clintel. We were talking here with some Swiss people to start Clintel Switzerland, or maybe Clintel Alps. How does that sound? So those are the plans. Okay, now to the main topic, the net zero policy in Europe. So I didn't hear it so far here. I've been here all 3 days. But this, for me, is like a symbolic moment. Recently, in the beginning of January, we had a big blackout in Berlin. What happened? So we had a big blackout in Spain. Of course, you heard about that, and everybody is talking about this. Yeah, this is because we have so much renewables, and the grid cannot deal with this. So we had a big blackout in Spain. Although Spain denies this, that it is due to renewables, but many experts believe it's the renewables had a big role in this. But this Berlin blackout was actually a terrorist attack. It was a terrorist attack. 100,000 people in Berlin were in the dark, and it was freezing. It was very cold. It was dark. Some people had to go to hotels or gyms to sleep there because it was impossible for them to stay at home. And the terrorist, the group that caused it, sent a letter to the media, a 2,500 word letter. And this is just a very small quote. The group is called the Vulkaangruppe, so the volcano group. I think it's related to Antifa and other groups like that. And this is one of their quotes. I will read it. In their greed for energy, the earth is being drained, sucked dry, burned, tormented, razed, raped, destroyed. Entire regions are being rendered uninhabitable under the beat. They simply burn up, or habitats vanish beneath the floods from deluges and due to rising sea levels. This could all be Extinction Rebellion, or a left-wing political party, but then the latest sentence: shutting down fossil fuel power plants is hands-on work, So, and this you should not see in a political party statement, of course. But so this is what happened and for me, this is really symbolic for where Europe is at the moment. So the next slide. Are Europeans worried about climate change? In the US, Gallup polls, we see that the fear for climate change is decreasing rapidly. In my opinion, that also is happening in Europe. But if you look at the official polls, this is the Eurobarometer, 85% of the respondents consider climate change a serious problem for the world. 85%. Climate change is seen as the most pressing issue in several member states and among the top 3 concerns in most others. This is a big contrast with what is happening in the US. So the next slide. And at the same time that this group has this terrorist attack, you wonder, maybe Europe is not doing enough, maybe Europe is too far behind. But Europe already has the most ambitious climate plans in the world, by far, I would say. Yeah. So there is a net zero target in 2050. And this target is legally binding in European climate law. And there is a Green Deal as a result of this, with extremely ambitious targets. Of course, net zero in 2050 means that you need extremely ambitious targets. So the targets now are 55% reduction in 2030 and even 90% reduction already in 2040. That was recently decided. And in Europe, we have an emission trading system, ETS. The US doesn't have this. It's already in place and it covers now 40% of the emissions. So it's mainly for energy, for power plants, for industry, etc. But they have to pay this price. So this is an extra penalty for them compared to competitors in China and in the US. And the price currently today, the price is 84 euros per ton of CO2. And if you calculate this into a liter of gasoline, it's about 20 cents. 20 cents a liter of gasoline. They have to pay. The industry has to pay. And we have also very ambitious renewable energy targets. The next target for 2030 is 42.5% renewable energy target. And nuclear is not regarded as renewable. So it can only come from hydro, from wind, from solar, and from biomass. And this is not target for electricity production. No, this is target for the primary energy use. So this is extremely ambitious. At the same time, if we look at the share of the global GDP, this graph, you see that Europe is in the decline for a long time. Already for 10, 15 years, Europe is in decline. Our GDP is falling, while at the same time, the GDP of the US is climbing and also China is increasing rapidly. So Europe is losing competitiveness compared to China and the USA. And if you look at this, the next slide about the CO2 emissions by region, I only selected Europe, US, and China. You see the strong correlation between the GDP going like this and the CO2 emissions going like this. Some green people claim that Europe is able to decouple growth with the climate policy. And these graphs show the opposite. So CO2 emissions are declining most rapidly in Europe, stronger than the US. Yeah, the US is also declining due to the fracking. Yeah, due to fracking, there is a change from coal to gas, And because of that, the CO2 emissions in the US are decreasing a little bit. But in Europe, it was 37% so far since 1990. So we are doing great, you could say. So why these terrorist groups should move somewhere else, not they should get away from Berlin and should go somewhere else. But so we see that the GDP is falling. And in my opinion, there is a clear and one-on-one relationship with the climate policy and the electricity prices. Here in this slide, you see electricity prices in Europe compared to China and the US again. And it's a huge difference. Electricity is 2 to 3 times more expensive in Europe, and the gas prices are even 4 to 5 times more expensive. And if we go to the next slide, which is a famous graph by Björn Lomborg, if we take the big picture, Europe at the moment is only 6% of the global emissions. 6%, and we are trying to get to 0. At the same time, China is increasing rapidly, And Björn Lomborg here calculates with the UN climate model, what is the effect of Europe going to net zero in 2100? And so in a generation, the effect is only 0.02 of a degree globally. And in 2100, the effect is only 0.08 degrees Celsius globally. So the effect is not even calculable, and still we are doing this. The next slide, climate policy, also from Björn Lomborg, climate policy don't do like the EU. Sometimes, especially in Brussels, you hear arguments, the fact that we have high energy prices due to the war in Ukraine. And in this graph, you see that indeed in 2022, we had a big spike in energy prices, of course, but you see that the tendency of increasing prices in Europe was way longer. The prices went up already for the last 20 years, especially when Germany started the Energiewende, the energy transition. Prices started to going up. And here you have the ETS prices, and you saw they were low for a long time, but then they were too low in the opinion of the leaders of the European Union. So they decided to get a lot of carbon credits out of the market, and then indeed the prices started to rise. And so it went up to 100 euros per ton, and now it's about 80. So industry has to pay this. Okay, let's now look into Germany. And we can immediately say there is a German deindustrialization taking place at the moment. And here you see, for example, Poland. I added Poland. And here you see Italy and Germany and Poland. And you see Poland is doing incredibly well, actually. Poland is increasing the industrial production, while Germany at the same time is decreasing its production. And manufacturing, steel, chemistry, chemical industry, automotive, they all suffer from the extremely high prices. And here is just one example of Volkswagen to shut 3 factories. And you can Google this and you see many factories in Germany closing, many factories in Holland closing, chemical factories. Yes, this is already happening. Also in Holland, lots of Holland is also, many people maybe don't know this, but Holland has always traditionally been had a big chemical industry, and they are suffering from all the regulations and all the. In Holland, it's even worse, because in Holland, on top of the ETS, the industry has to pay an extra CO2 tax. This is truly crazy, because we already have like a uniform European ETS price, and Holland added on top of this a CO2 tax for the industry. That's truly amazing. So the German deindustrialization, since 2019, 272,000 industrial jobs were lost. That's 5% of the total positions. In the last 2 years, 120,000 industrial jobs were destroyed, with almost 50,000 in automotive alone. And there are announced cuts over 125,000 additional jobs at risk at Volkswagen and Tyson Group, steel industry. And So Germany is our leader in the energy transition. Yeah, they call it the Energiewende. Yeah. So what did they do? We all know the story. They closed down all the nuclear power stations. Yeah, in 2023 it was the last one because of Fukushima. The real reason was that Merkel was about to lose elections, and she decided, okay, I use Fukushima, the disaster in Fukushima, I use it to close them down, and it worked because she won the election. But now Germany has to pay the price for this. And here in this graph, so Germany wants to electrify the society. Yeah, they want to electrify transport, industry. They want to electrify everything. So you would expect that electricity consumption is going up rapidly. But here in this graph, you see electricity consumption, and you see that electricity consumption is actually decreasing in the last few years. How is this possible? Well, the reason is the deindustrialization. The system totally collapses. How are they doing in terms of CO2? This is a fascinating graph. You only look at the right-hand side of the. In blue, you see France, and this is the CO2 emissions per day. Yeah, for the electricity production, and you see France is terribly low because of all their nuclear power station, and on the gray dots is Germany, and this was last year, and you can see here that there was not a single day where Germany had less CO2 emissions than France. Every single day, France had lower CO2 emissions in the electricity production than Germany. Although Germany so far invested 500 billion in the energy transition, 500 billion. And estimates are that they need 10 times more if they truly want to go to net zero with solar and wind, with renewables, So this is completely impossible. So it will not happen, but these are the estimates. Last week, this was also not mentioned so far in this conference, Friedrich Merz, the Chancellor of Germany, gave a talk for corporations 5 days ago, and he said, to my amazement, the nuclear phase out was a big strategic mistake. Remember that his Merkel is from the same party. Yeah, so this is an accusation back to Merkel as well. So Merz now admits going out of nuclear was a big mistake. This is breaking news. This is amazing, and probably. Does he really mean it? It's not very important, because what is important is that he said it. It's now on the record. He said it was a big strategic mistake. Do I believe him that he really means it? No, not really. By the way, Merz, about what did he say as well during this talk last week? We are now making the most expensive energy transition in the entire world. I don't know of a second country that makes it as difficult and as expensive for itself as Germany does. This is also a quote from his talk last year. Why don't I believe that he means it? Because only a few months ago, there is this picture of cooling towers that were destroyed in Germany. So he also said during the talk, we shouldn't, the last 3 remaining nuclear power plants, we should have kept them. So they didn't do it. And in the talk, he also say, yeah, we can use these locations to start new power plants. But what does he mean with new power plants? Germany is now going to build gas power plants. Yeah, so nuclear is going to be changed by gas. This is now the strategy. It is a start. That Merz admitted this. So deindustrialization in Germany, in the Netherlands, also in Belgium. So what also happens a lot is this is just one example that a recent one. It's a company called Vioneo, and they announced this week that they are not going to build a 1.5 billion plastic factory in Antwerp in Belgium because the economic situation is not good enough, and they will probably do it in China. Yeah, so some factories are being closed, other factories are not being built. Yeah, people are not investing in Europe anymore. And this is Sir Jim Ratcliffe. He's a British owner of Ineos, a big chemical company. And he sent an open letter last year to von der Leyen, to the Commission. And the letter, you can Google his name and the open letter to the EU. The letter is very short, but I selected some quotes because this is really powerful stuff. Chemicals in Europe is facing extinction. Government policies have resulted in enormously high energy prices and crippling carbon tax bills. The gas bill is 100 million higher than its US equivalent. The electricity bill is 40 million higher than in the US. The carbon tax bill is rising towards a shocking 100 million. More, government policies will shut all petrochemicals in Europe. All our major competitors are planning for withdrawal from Europe as government has failed to act time after time. Decarbonizing Europe by deindustrialization is idiotic. We lose jobs and security, and the CO2 simply floats back over Europe anyway, yeah, because it moves to other parts of the world. And finally, the consequence of this policy is that Europe will import all its raw materials from the USA and China, who will benefit enormously. So congratulations, James, Jim, and the others. You will have the profit, and we will suffer. So, okay, let's go to the Netherlands, because that's where I live. I have been living there all my life. And in Holland, we are a population. People see us Dutch people as very rational people. We were traders. We are very practical and rational, you know. But if you look at climate policy in the Netherlands, it's almost as bad as Germany. We are following Germany, and some of the decisions that we made are maybe even worse than Germany. And I will give you an example. Holland, the Netherlands, owns the biggest gas field in Europe. It's in Groningen. It's this place. And because of the Paris Agreement and the Green Lobby lobbied the government, and they said, you know, so what happened in Groningen, is in the northern part of the Netherlands. What happened is because of the gas winning, there were some minor earthquakes, and the government didn't pay damage, didn't compensate the damage quickly enough to the citizens in this area. And so the citizens there were complaining, and the Green Lobby, they used this. They said, well, government, we need to go to net zero anyway, and we have these earthquakes. Why don't we just stop winning gas from Groningen? And this is now government policy, parliament, majority in the parliament, and they went even so far that they are now filling the gas wells, they're filling them with concrete. So they can never be open again. This is now taking place in the Netherlands. So that's one. So at the same time, our country is very densely populated. And this is happening. Solar parks, if you go to the eastern part of the country where there is a little bit more space, you see solar parks everywhere. And Holland is not very sunny, as you know. It's raining all the time. So what are we doing with all these solar? You know, it's crazy. But anyway, we are doing this, subsidized, of course, big subsidies, billions of subsidies. Windmills, we have lots of windmills. And the most important plan, here you see a map of the North Sea and the Baltic Sea. And the North Sea, between the Netherlands and England, you see all these colors. And all these colors are wind parks. Yeah. And they want to build 30,000 windmills in the North Sea. It's crazy. I live near the coast, and when I walk along the beach, I already see dozens of them. But this is only the start. You know, it will continue. Maybe not, because you have heard that lately the tenders that they have for wind parks. Here you see an example. No bids submitted for new Dutch North Sea wind farm tender. So the market for wind parks is now so bad that the companies don't want to bid anymore on the tenders. And so this would be good news, you would say. But our minister, we have a minister of climate, of course, We have a minister of climate and green growth. That's how that's how they call the ministry. I always joke, no, this is wrong. It should be the minister of climate and green shrink. That's the honest name for it. That would be honest. Anyway, so in reaction to this news, she said, "Oh, we are going to miss our targets, so we will again give subsidy to new companies that are willing to do it." So she already offered again 1 billion euro subsidy for the next wind park. So this is how they going to do it. One consequence of the whole policy is that this village is called Moerdijk. It's a small village, 1,200 people. Recently, it was announced that the village has to be gone, to be finished, because they say, because we have to extend industry. We are going to expand industry. This village is near Shell, chemical companies, etc., etc. But the main reason is that all this wind in the North Sea, they have to bring it to the land. And they're going to do that here. So it will be a converter stations for the electricity from the sea, and it will be hydrogen plants to all the excess wind electricity. They will use it for hydrogen. Yeah. And so we don't know yet what will happen, because Shell is one of the companies, of course, that wants to, if you give us subsidy, we want to build a hydrogen plant, And so Shell is working on a hydrogen plant in this region, but even with the subsidy, it's uncertain if it will be finished, because there is no market. Actually, I spoke with somebody working at Shell, and he says, "Well, yeah, we are trying, but there is no market for this. It's too expensive, and so yeah, what can we do?" And so I'm almost done. This I found hilarious. This was last week. This was in the news in the Netherlands. So this headline says, "Netherlands faces billions in cost if renewable energy targets are missed." So there was a report last week, and it said, okay, wind is now in problem, solar is now in problem in the Netherlands, and so we probably miss our 2030 targets. And the Green Lobby ordered a report and said, what is going to happen if Holland misses the target? And the report says this will cost us 2.6 billion euros. Why? Because if we miss the target, we could get a penalty from the EU, or we could buy excess renewable energy from other countries. We did this before in 2020. So in 2020, we missed our target, but Denmark was already on top of their target. And so we paid 200 million to Denmark, and then could use some renewable energy from Denmark to add it to our target. But the gap between the target and what we have in 2030 will be much bigger. It will be 32% instead of 39%. And this gap will cost us 2.6 billion euros, according to a report. And if I follow like Dutch politics closely, this is how the people there in The Hague, this is really how they think. Yeah, they will do it. They will do it. They will not say, fuck it, Europe. It's going slower, but there is no business case, whatever. They will just pay like the penalty, It's completely crazy. So to end, is it all doom and gloom? No, Mark Morano also mentioned it. This Sweden is retreating from its bold green ambitions. There's also an article last week. Yeah, so we see some signs that in Europe, rationality is returning. In Sweden, there is now a more right-wing government that is building nuclear power plants, that is stopping wind parks in the sea, that's not subsidizing a battery company. A battery company went bankrupt, and the government is not bailing them out. But on the same time, the EU, this is Wopke Hoekstra, he is like the Dutch climate czar. And although internationally everybody stops doing like ambitious climate policy, the climate conference in Belém in Brazil was a big failure. And in the same period, the EU decided to up the target for 2040 to 90%. You know, it's completely unrealistic. It's not going to happen, but they act as if nothing changes and they go on. It reminds me, I didn't live under communism, of course, but it reminds me a little bit of communism, that before, in 1989, the communist leaders were still like having their life, you know, and then suddenly the wall goes down and it suddenly ends, you know. And I wonder if something like this will happen with Europe. I hope, of course, it will happen, but they act like if nothing is going on, you know. And I found this cartoon, this cartoon, this is my final slide. This cartoon was based on Brexit. So you see England drifting away. But for me, it symbolizes also the state of technology, of our mindset in Europe, you know, that we are literally going back in time and yeah. So I'm very sorry for my European fellows that my talk was a little bit negative, and but yeah, we are realists, you know, and so we have to face the facts, and we will keep on fighting them, and let's hope that the Berlin Wall moment will come soon. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marcel. I have an antidote for your self-professed and negative reporting there on the EU. I hear Trump was really on fire today in Davos. Actually, well, I didn't really hear it, and few people did, at least not all the way through, because curiously enough, there were audio problems as Trump was speaking in Davos, kind of like there were audio problems like he was speaking in the United Nations. And when I heard that, and of course, we were told after his United Nations talk, oh, it was just a technical glitch. There was, you know, nothing nefarious involved. It's just, you know, technology, and sometimes you just, you know, not functioning right. And I imagine we'll hear that after today's Trump talk in Davos. And so just out of curiosity, I decided to do a little internet search, and here I find this article. This is published in Fortune yesterday. The title is Inside Davos's Pricey Power Club, Why Executives Spend Up to $1 million a year for access. $1 million a year per executive. It's not even talking about the corporations, not just the individuals and executives, but all the money coming in from all these corporations. Tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, whatever they raise, it's absolutely insane. It's unfathomable. And of course, the United Nations, with all of the money they have pouring in from all over the world, largely and ironically from the United States. And it got me to thinking, now at the Heartland Institute, our annual budget is just a few $1,000,000. So one corporate exec traveling to Davos can pretty much fund Heartland just on his Davos membership for several months of the year. And then, of course, and on top of that, one corporate exec, I'm thinking, okay, BlackRock is there in prominence and talking about how they're saving the world and making it such a better place. I'm sure Netflix is there in Davos telling the world they're making it such a better place. And I'm thinking, okay, so Davos, the message is the warm glow of collectivism, the top-down governance by the elites, the bureaucratic elites, the technical elites, versus the World Prosperity Forum and power emanating from and remaining with the people. Well, okay, they have their point of view, we have ours. Maybe we should have a little challenge. Forget about the tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars that are pouring into Davos so that they can put on the greatest show that they know how to do. Forget about all the money in the United Nations. Let's just forget about the disparities in funding. Let's just have a little challenge, a little test, a little competition here. Who can keep a microphone on? I think we have a winner, folks. It's freedom. It's the World Prosperity Forum. We can keep a microphone on. Davos cannot. As much as Donald Trump is so hated by the leftist elites, by the collectivists, Donald Trump is not alone. One of the heroes of freedom is Viktor Orban in Hungary. And István very compellingly told how Hungary is succeeding where much of the world is not. And of course, I mean, the Hungarian people are wonderful people. I love being in Hungary, but it's not so much the genetics of the Hungarian people, it's the choices that are made politically, policy-wise. And for that, Viktor Orban is persona non grata. So István gave a very compelling talk yesterday with a role model, a map for the rest of the world to follow. And we're very fortunate here at the World Prosperity Forum that not only do we have István Kist from the Danube Institute who spoke with us yesterday, but we have another expert, another speaker who will be joining us in just a moment. I'd like to introduce him to you. Dr. Callum T.M. Nicholson. He read social anthropology at Trinity College, Cambridge, and was awarded a master's in philosophy and migration studies from St. Antony's College, Oxford. He holds a doctorate in human geography. He was most recently the director of the Climate Policy Institute and has served as a visiting fellow at the Matthias Corvinus Collegium since 2021. He also continues to teach courses on international migration, international development, and the impact of social media at the Institute of Continuing Education, University of Cambridge. In 2023, his edited volume, Climate Migration, Critical Perspectives for Law, Policy, and Research, was published by Hart Bloomsbury. His research interests encompass the role of science in society, political polarization, and international interventions. And right now, he's going to tell us a little bit about it. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Callum T.M. Nicholson.
Thank you very much for the introduction there. I should also just note my role in which I'm currently here. I'm Director of Research at the Danube Institute with István in Hungary, and it was good to hear István talk about Hungary yesterday. And I'm not Hungarian, but I've been living there for 4.5 years, and it's quite difficult to explain what makes Hungary different. But my best attempt is to say being Hungarian is an attitude, and I think that everyone here in this room seems to be somewhat Hungarian in some way. So. But thank you very much for the invitation to speak. So I've been asked to talk about climate change. And a few months ago, I produced a paper through the Danube Institute Research Department called How to Think About Climate Change Beyond the Culture War. And this is the paper here, lovely black cover, as you can see. There's a few copies in the room. If you're watching online, you can find it on the Danube Institute website. And the context of this paper is, I think, broader than climate change, because I think some of the problems that are manifest in the debate around climate are actually a pattern that's replicated across the culture. And I think there's a broader problem we've all noted in the culture right now of this type of polarization whereby it's got a bit stale, that both sides look at the other side and say, you're the disease and I'm the cure, and vice versa. And it's a bit of a hiding to nothing in the sense that, you know, if you fight fire with fire, you end up with inferno. At least in my view. I don't think there's always a very constructive dialogue. So much of the debate is people defining themselves less by what they believe, but more by what they do not believe, saying the other people are wrong and probably stupid. That's kind of the assumption often on both sides. So what I want to do today is talk about, to kind of give a model, at least in terms of how I think about how we can offer perspectives on issues which transcend this type of destructive polarization. Because, you know, if you look online, Twitter and social media runs a lot on this algorithmic sort of antagonism. But actually, I think what most people want, and particularly if you're thinking politically in terms of swing voters, are looking for people who actually have answers and actually have constructive frames of reference. It's not purely antagonistic. And I want to offer a way of looking at climate change that illustrates just a case study of how this could happen, at least in my view. But to begin, I want to before I start talking about climate change, I want to talk about something which is actually nothing to do with climate change, but you'll see hopefully how it's relevant. So what I want to talk about is something that happened on the 31st of May, 1971. So on that day, I think about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, an earthquake hit Peru, the area of Arequipa. That's where the the epicenter was. And it knocked down, I think, left 500,000 people homeless, destroyed about 200,000 buildings. It killed 70,000 people. And my understanding is that to this day, it is the most destructive event, natural disaster, that's hit the Western Hemisphere. I think still to this day. And it was, but what was interesting is that about 20 years after, there was an anthropologist called Anthony Oliver Smith at the University of Florida. And he wrote a very interesting paper about this earthquake, and he called it Peru's 500-year earthquake. Any guesses what he meant by 500-year earthquake? Any guesses?
Last one happened about 500 years
Last
ago.
one happened 500 years ago? Yeah? Continuous? Yeah. Continuous earthquakes for 500 years? Yeah. I've heard those sorts of answers, and also things like, it'll take 500 years to rebuild, these sorts of things. Actually, what he meant was something subtly different. He said that he argued that it took 500 years for the conditions to be there whereby this earthquake was disastrous as it was. It's worth pulling back for a second. Peru has been settled for about 10,000 years. For the first 9,500 years, people understood that it was an earthquake-prone zone. They had various adaptations. So, for instance, they didn't cement together the walls. They tied them together so they can move freely in an earthquake. They didn't tile the roofs. They thatched the roofs. So when the roof fell in, it didn't hit you on the head and cause a head injury. They had storehouses full of grain so that if there was an emergency, you could actually still feed people. And crucially, knowing that the epicenter was in an area called Arequipa, which is a very fertile part of a plain by a river, because they knew it was an earthquake hot zone, they didn't build a city there. But then 500 years ago, something happened. Namely, the Spanish arrived. What did the Spanish do? Well, first of all, they built in the Spanish style. They cemented together the walls. They tiled the roofs. They also took the storehouses of grain as a sort of tax. But what they also did, they built and then rebuilt and rebuilt and rebuilt a city at Arequipa, which was knocked down at least 4 times in the 18th century alone. So what happened is by 1970, you had a combination of 3 factors. You had a vast population increase in the 20th century. You had the mother of all earthquakes. It was 7.7 on the Richter scale. And you also had basically 500 years of maladapted culture. And so as a consequence, when the earthquake hit, the walls fell out into the streets and killed the pedestrians. The roofs fell in and killed the people inside. There was no real emergency backup service, and most people were concentrated in places like Arequipa. Hence, this was the most destructive earthquake in terms of death toll and people left homeless and so on. But what's really interesting, there's an area of academic research called disaster risk reduction scholarship. And they have basically been dining out on a single insight for the last 40 years. And when I say what the insight is, it's going to sound absurd. And when I kind of clarify, it'll sound more absurd, and then I'll explain it. So the basic line they have, they say earthquakes don't kill people. And also they say there's no such thing as a natural disaster. So it says no such thing as a natural disaster. Sounds absurd. And earthquakes don't kill people. But what they say is earthquakes don't kill people. What kills people is collapsing buildings. Their point is that disasters are not strictly natural. Disasters they're not strictly natural. What is natural is hazards. But the disaster is often social, political, economic, historical. And again, it's worth pulling back for a second on this concept of hazards being natural, that we forget this. You and I, all of us here in the room, online, we are all the beneficiaries, not just of years of technology and stuff we've bought and the clothes we're wearing today, or even decades of it, or even centuries of it. We are the beneficiaries of thousands and thousands of years of iterative human best practice of how to solve problems. The clothes I'm wearing are probably made, probably in China, but the weave style has probably been around for 10,000 years. The plants or whatever it's made of, who knows, that they were domesticated 10,000 years ago. I think as Rousseau said, it's not the Romans who are ancient, it's we who are ancient, because we know far more than they do. And I think there's something true in this, that we are, all of us, the recipients or standing on the top of sedimented layers of culture going back far further than human memory, far more than we can even trace. And as a consequence of that, if you strip away all of that culture, all the stuff we've learned, all the techniques we have for survival, all of us, especially right now here in Zurich, would be dead in 72 hours, just from exposure, out, without any of the clothes and the buildings and so on. Here in Zurich, we'd be dead quite quickly. So we don't notice this because we don't recognize how hazardous the world is, how much the world is trying to eat us, because we've built so many systems, not just the clothing and the buildings, but we have traditions and routines. In the city, cities are full of one-ton objects moving very fast. It could be a car. It could be the strange thing for any North Americans here, a tram, all these different things which are very dangerous if you stand in front of them. But we have ways to avoid that. We've built sidewalks. We have a tradition, you walk on the sidewalk and so on. So my point is that disasters, the disaster risk reduction scholars would argue, are not strictly natural. They're social, political, economic, and indeed historical. And so now, why am I talking about an earthquake? Because I'm supposed to be talking about climate change. My point is this, that an earthquake is something you can identify in space and time and magnitude. You can say it happened here on the 31st of May, 1971. At this point, this is the epicenter. It lasted 45 seconds. We know all that. And yet, even in a circumstance like that, we cannot actually draw a linear causal relationship between the environmental factor and the social outcome, because it's conditioned by so many other human factors, culture, economy, and so on, history. And we all know this. If you look at the same magnitude earthquake happening in an area of the same population density, but in two contexts, one is Japan and one is Haiti, we all kind of know it will kill more people in Haiti. Why? Because the Japanese build buildings that are much more earthquake adapted, that levels of corruption are lower, that building standards are higher, that emergency services are quicker. So that's why, so these human factors do determine the outcome. So again, why am I talking about an earthquake? I'm supposed to be talking about climate change. Well, here's the thing with climate change, is that people often forget what the definition of climate change is. When you talk about climate change, you've got two words in it, climate and change. Climate is, first of all, talking about a global average. It's an aggregate. When you hear like 3 degrees, it's not 3 degrees in Zurich, it's 3 degrees as an average globally. And secondly, when you talk about change, the temporal factor in that of change over time, does anyone know what it is? What the length of measurement is to measure change with climate change? Any guesses? 30 years, exactly. Some people know. Good. So a lot of people don't know it. It's very interesting. So a 30-year rolling average. So 1996 to 2026. That's the rolling average right now. The truth is, we don't live our lives at a global level of abstraction or a 30-year level of abstraction. 30 years is almost a career length for most people. And we don't live our lives at those scales. The problem is that it's not that climate change as a framing is wrong as such. It's simply that it's at a level of abstraction at which we do not actually live our lives. And actually where we implement policy and take action always is at a particular time in a particular place. So this abstraction may be it may be an analysis of the world, but in this sense, it's also an artifact of our culture. And it's important to note, the planet's always been there, but a planetary frame of reference has not. That's fairly recent. And for us to even think in terms of climate change, by the way, there's so many things that have to exist for us to even think at that level of abstraction. You have to, for instance, essentially, you have to know it is a planet, first of all. We've only known that for a few hundred years, that there is actually a round planet, more or less. Switzerland's not probably that round, to be fair. But it's also, you have to then have a contiguous notion of nation states worldwide with the same sort of political operating system so they can speak to each other. Until like the 1840s, the Russians couldn't communicate with the Khanate of Khiva because they chopped the head off of every ambassador. It was only very recently, in the last 150 years, that we've had a standardized way we actually interact with each other. Even North Korea is part of that system. You also have to have standardized weights and measures. It was only really in 1948 that Celsius and joules became a standard international metric. It was only in 1960 that the metric system became a global standard for most people. Americans are often an exception to this. We're going to get you eventually. But the standardization as global standards are actually quite new. And also you need to actually have the technology to do the measuring to begin with. So to even conceive of something at a global level of abstraction, let alone to actually have the technology to do so, that's all super recent. It's not something that would have had any meaning to someone a few hundred years ago. 200 years ago, to talk of global climate change at that level of measurement would have as much relevance as us talking about the solar system at some galactic level of analysis, because you couldn't go there. You couldn't think that at that level of abstraction. My point here is that if it's true with an earthquake that we can't draw a linear causal relationship between the environmental factor and the social outcome, then and that's something we can identify in space and time. Is it not at least as true when we think about climate change? Because we're talking, by definition, of something at a global level of abstraction and a 30-year rolling average. Why does all that matter? Why does this kind of comparison really matter? I think and bear in mind my context of this is to say we have this very polarized set of debates across the culture on most issues, really. But climate change is a good example of it. The reason I think it matters is I think sometimes what's happening with this polarized debate is that you have opposite but symmetrical naiveties on both sides. And what I'm about to say may be partly not very popular in this room, but just bear with me. I think the problem with the whole climate debate is this, that, well, first of all, just to say, there is a context in which we care about climate change, or people care about it. It's not as an end in itself, it's because people presume two things, that it will have a social impact or a societal impact, which is negative. So therefore, implied in that is that we're interested not just in climate, but also in society. We need not just data on the science of climate change, but we also kind of need to know what we mean by society. What is society? What ought it to be? What are its internal mechanisms of change? What is society's relationship to extra societal factors, for instance, climate change? So the problem with the climate debate is that you really, to have any sort of policy relevant understanding, you don't just need a scientific understanding of the climate, you need to have a pretty good understanding of ourselves. I think one of the challenges with the climate debate is that the one side of the debate, the climate activist side, look at the climate skeptic side, and they say, those guys have too little faith in the science. Maybe, maybe not. But what's interesting, I think you can make the opposite but equivalent critique of the activist side. You can say they have too much faith in the social science. They assume they know what society is, or they assume there is no question about this. And by the way, the same pattern applied when we look at what happened with COVID 5 years ago. Because what you heard across the world were states saying we're following the science. But the reason we cared about COVID was because of its presumed societal impact. And that implies a discussion of what society is and what we think it ought to be. What are our values? What is an acceptable level of risk? Jonathan Sumption had a great line. He said, the central question of COVID is there more to life than the avoidance of death? There is no scientific answer to that question. It's fundamentally a human question that's inherently subjective. It's about values. It's about culture. It's thus the topic of politics, where there are never really clear answers. There are just arguments, and we can play them out, and we can debate them. But the problem was with the entire COVID debate is that we were not using science in the service of our values. Rather, we were deferring to science as scientism, science as religion, as a guide to what our values should be. There's a real danger in doing that. And I think what we're seeing across the culture is a pattern of scientism, not the scientific, but the scientistic. This idea that science can be a guide to what our values ought to be. I think this is a fairly naive position we've fallen into in this technocratic world we're living in. So the point of all this is that if you look at the climate debate, I think it is probably true that sometimes the sort of climate denier side have too little faith in the science. The science of climate change, maybe it's okay, maybe it's not, but I kind of think almost from a risk-averse position, it's worth assuming there is a problem with it. The science is pretty good. But then my point is, even if you do that, there's still a huge question as to the social science, what the policy should be. Just because you know the science, presuming we do, doesn't mean you know the social consequence. I would argue that our understanding of climate change is, yes, informed by a fairly rich understanding of science, but it is as if not more informed by an impoverished understanding of ourselves. And I think that's the much bigger problem. So it's the reason I'm laying all this out, because my starting point in this, I think, how much time have I got? Plenty of time? Plenty of time. Oh, great. I can spin this out a bit further. But I got more to say on this, but here's the actually, how much time do I have?
15 minutes.
Okay, that's fine. I won't take up all the time. When you look at the way this debate is played out, the problem is right now we have these two sides of this debate, and they're not talking to each other. They think each other's side is stupid, and therefore what happens is that we're never actually reaching any kind of consensus people can rally around and say, okay, we kind of agree that this is a solution to the problem, because we can't even agree on the problem. I mean, I will say one of the patterns we're seeing in society right now, it used to be that, and we forget this, the 20th century we think was a very divided time because you had the communists and the capitalists in the Cold War. But actually they were kind of unified by something. They both agreed that the problem was political economic. They just had different solutions. The capitalists said that it should be a market a driven approach, and the communists said it should be state-led. But they both agreed on the problem. And the problem today, I think, is that we don't even agree on the problem, mostly because we think the problem is each other. And that's the kind of the central problem we're running into. So if we're going to have a culture where it's not simply ad hominem and fighting fire with fire, we've got to find some common ground. And so my sense is, if you look at the climate debate as an example, the common ground would to say, okay, we can debate the science, but let's, for the sake of argument, just assume the science is fine. All the interesting problems remain untouched. Ludwig Wittgenstein wrote this once. He said, even when all the problems of science have been resolved, all the problems of life remain untouched. And I think there's something true to that we can debate the science, but the real question is about ourselves. It's about what sort of society do you want to live in? And I think you can have those debates even without touching on the science. You can even, for the sake of argument, assume the science is fine and still disagree with all the policy prescriptions that are coming from people talking about, say, net zero. So that's my general point, but there's one other thing I think I'll just add, which is about why the climate framing has captured our imagination in the way it has, or captured so many people's imagination. It's interesting how, even though it's such a level of abstraction, how has it gripped everyone's imagination? And my sense is it's all about the metaphors we're using. You know, often the metaphors we use to explain society are derived from whatever type of machines or tools we have, which are currently popular. So I don't know this for sure, what I'm about to say, but I suspect it's true. So in Hungarian, the word for revolution is a much better word than what we have in English. The word is forradalom, and it literally translates as the boiling over of the people. It's a steam-based metaphor. And they refer to the 1956 revolution that way, but also the 1848 revolution that way. But what's interesting, both those revolutions existed in the era of steam power. And I do wonder sometimes, and I don't know this for sure, and Istvan would know better than me, but I have wondered if that may be a product of the steam age, to take that metaphor. But it's also true we use network metaphors in the age of the internet now and so on. So metaphors often drive things. Now, there's one that I think is deeply embedded in the culture, and it has its place, but we've gone too far with it. So we all in high school studied Newton's laws of motion. And the three laws of motion, you know, many of us remember. The first is an object stays in its current state unless acted on by another force. The second is the amount of change in the object is dependent on the force applied. And the third is every action leads to an equal and opposite reaction. Very mechanistic understanding of the universe, of course. But I kind of think we've internalized that as a whole culture, because I think when we look around at our own culture, when we look around at society, we kind of assume that if it wasn't for something like climate change, that society would just continue along in its current state. Everything's fine. And then we think the amount of climate change will be proportional to the amount of societal change, which is at the second law of motion. And then we assume that all of that change that happens should be met by an equal and opposite sense of societal resistance. It's all bad. And I do think this sort of metaphor is quite deeply embedded. But the reason I think, to the extent to which it is, the reason I think it's a flawed metaphor is this. The laws, like the world of physical things, the laws of physics are a unity. The laws of physics and chemistry apply everywhere equally. But the problem is, you and I, we are not a unity, we are a plurality. And not just between each other, within ourselves. I mean, depending on how many cups of tea I've had, and I'm British, so obviously this is a very important element, depending on how many cups of tea I had, I disagree with myself on a lot of issues. And within the same day, we all have this experience. We're quite quantum creatures like this. We exist in two states at once. And so if you, how do I explain this? So we're quite a plural society. And to give you an example of this, imagine we had this room and there was no one in it. It was just all the physical objects. And imagine I had perfect data on all the objects, the materials, what's made up, the mass, the stored energy, everything. I could, in theory, actually in practice, if I had all that information, I could model it in a computer, and I could model what would happen if I dropped a grenade in the middle, of where all the chairs would go and where the lights would go and so on. So we can predict that because the laws of chemistry and physics are a unity mathematically. But here's the thing, if I dropped a grenade in this room now, not only I, but also you could not predict how everyone's going to behave, not least yourself. Some people might run out the room. Some people may freeze in fear. At least one brave, but probably foolish person would jump on the grenade to protect everyone else. And the problem is, we don't even know how we'd react. It's this source of a lot of, there's whole movies written about people reacting. There's a great film made recently of a family who go to the Alps and an avalanche comes and the father runs away, and the whole drama is about the collapse of the family after everyone realized he's a coward who runs away. But he didn't know he'd do that. Often we don't know how to react in a crisis. So my point is here that culture and society, we're plural in our morals, our mores, our forms of meaning. We're plural. And that's not a fault. It's a feature of being human. It's essential to who we are. And so one of the challenges with the climate debate, it seems to me, is that we're operating, when we think about it, with quite a mechanistic understanding that perhaps is applicable to the study of physical things. But I think it's debatable whether it's applicable to society itself. So my summary on this is that within the climate debate, the real fault line, the real flaw, and not only the flaw, but the thing we can do something about, and also the thing we can really reason without getting into a he said, she said about the scientific facts, are the questions of what society is, what it ought to be, how it operates. And if we had answers to any of that about society, then we wouldn't need philosophy. All the questions the Greeks were asking 2,500 years ago, we've never answered any of them. We keep asking the same questions. And again, that's not a fault, it's a feature of being human. We're not probably capable of answering them. So my point here is simply that when we look at climate change, at the moment, climate change is caught up in this culture war distinction, where it's defined so much about what we do not believe and who we are not, which is the other side, who are idiots, everyone assumes. And that's fun. But it's not actually that sustainable. And I think most people would agree, regardless of their politics, that things are getting a bit febrile. If you look at the United States right now, it's very divided. I don't think it's going to lead, as some people say, to civil war, but definitely communal violence is possible, which has been experienced by other nations. India had a lot of communal violence in the 80s and 90s, Hindus and Muslims. This could happen again, maybe on a different distinction. It could be class. It could be red state, blue state. It could be different things. I don't think any of us like the idea of that type of escalation. So the trick is, I think, to find some common ground. And I think with an example of the climate debate, it's possible to reframe the discussion onto ground where there is more room for political debate. So that's my general sort of view of climate change, that I simply think that the climate debate is one where both sides have approached it perhaps in both sides have missed something. I think both sides could debate the social science or the social side of it much more. And really, ultimately, in the climate debate, it's not really, I think, strictly a debate of the science. It's a debate about us. It's who we are. So that's my general point, that climate change is I think a case study through which you can see broader patterns playing out in the culture, which are causing a lot of problems that we are increasingly, all of us, becoming victims of. And you've seen the stuff that happened in the States. You see what happened to Charlie Kirk a few months ago. Tragic. But can you imagine that happening 15 years ago? And can you imagine it happening again the next 5 years? Probably quite frequently. Most of the kind of influencer people I know have big security details when they travel now. And it's particularly in the United States. I don't think that's constructive. And so if we're serious about trying to resolve some of these issues and presenting a positive vision of what society can be, maybe we need to get away from some of the stuff that works on Twitter, but maybe doesn't really lead to much actual progress I don't mean progress in a progressive way, but just of us moving forward in a way that simply isn't moving everything backward and causing, in trying to solve things, causing entirely new problems. Thank you very much.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Colin. Now is the time for Q&A. I'd like everyone who spoke today to actually come back. Yeah, I should have said that before you started, Callum, so you have to come all the way back. But to come on up here and have a seat, and we will take some questions from our live streaming audience, but also I have taken some, we had the unfortunate timing of today's, and we'll use this microphone here. If you could pass it around to people when it's time. Okay. There we go. So yeah, we had the unfortunate timing of starting today, right as Donald Trump was giving the most anticipated international speech in the last month at least, but a pretty big one. And happily, I have some of his quotes from today that, well, they are unique to the most unique American president ever. Before we get to that, though, I actually there's a couple of questions here that I think our Polish delegation here can speak to directly, and I want to actually start with that. So stay tuned for the Trump reaction. This will be a great reaction. It'll be one of the first one online as well, which is really nice. But first, Ian McMillan, who's a frequent viewer of ours, he asked if the farmer protests in Europe are having the desired effect. We've seen them in America online, and that's a very good question. That's fine, yeah.
Czy protesty? Ja powiem, że protesty rolników odnoszą skutek, dlatego to jest wywieranie wywieranie presji na Urszuli von der Leyen i Parlamencie Europejskim, dlatego mamy dzisiaj to, że umowa poszła do Trybunału. Do tego trzeba jeszcze powiedzieć, że rolnicy robią wszystko, żeby było tak, jak oni to przewidują, żeby nie było rolnikach bez rolników.
So they have an effect. So today's voting in European Parliament shows that pressure makes sense. We have a saying like this in Poland. The Mercosur deal was directed to the European Tribunal of Justice. And so that's why farmers are protesting, and they do everything to prevent from disasters orchestrated by our European leaders.
Yeah. I've seen images of farmers spraying manure on certain buildings in Europe. Was it the Netherlands, or am I getting that wrong? But have there been
not recently?
Not recently? Has there been any kind of farming uprising in the Netherlands, or am I getting my countries incorrect?
There has been many farmers protests in the Netherlands in the last 5 years, but what many people in the US don't realize is that this has nothing to do with climate change, but this has anything to do with our nitrogen crisis. That's a really absurd crisis as well, even more absurd almost than climate change, because the idea is that nitrogen emissions from farmers will kill biodiversity in the Netherlands. And because of this, there are very strict emission rules, now so strict that you cannot even build houses anymore, because when you build houses, there is some nitrogen emission and there are no allowances anymore, so no permits. This has become a broader crisis than just the farmers. But recently, I think the Dutch farmers were quite silent.
Okay. This is a question from Stan Goldenberg, who's another frequent viewer of Heartland Institute live streams. He asks, and I guess the whole panel can maybe answer to this to some extent, but how would you rate the various European countries on how sold out, or how, I guess, all in they are on climate change hysteria policies, and which countries have fully or are maybe going to be mostly rejecting those policies?
All right. Hello, Stan. And thank you for the question, my good friend, Stan Goldenberg. Well, I think one thing to keep in mind is when we are ranking or assigning some prevalent thought to European countries, keeping in mind the policies are set by the governing elites. And really, it's more an extent to how much control the elite ruling class has. Because, for example, in the UK, where you have Keir Starmer, and before him, unfortunately, Tory leaders, Boris Johnson, Theresa May, who are all in on fighting the climate crisis and net zero policies, they're in bad shape. But the people are increasingly rising up, and that's one of the two issues that are fueling the surge and are forming the emphasis among the Reform Party policymakers and their agenda. It's immigration and net zero. Our Heartland Institute friend, Harold Volimsky, reports the same thing in Austria, and as it reports through the rest of Central and Eastern Europe. And our friends at the Danube Institute can weigh in perhaps as well. But it is immigration and the net zero policies that are driving the popularity of the grassroots conservative parties there. So what we have in, say, for example, the UK, the policy is insane right now. We see that in Germany. We see that in other nations. But the people are increasingly rising up against it. So am I going to rank them? I guess I could rank the leadership right now, the ruling leadership. I hate to rank the country because I think that there's quite a bit of change going on. The worst of the bunch right now, if I were to say Germany and the UK, and really you just need to look at the price of electricity in countries throughout Europe to see how far they have gone all in on wind and solar power, which are prohibitively expensive. I'll be documenting that on Friday, by the way. When people say wind and solar are already less expensive than coal and natural gas, they're full of it, and I have the objective numbers. But we're making progress.
Hi, thanks. I just said something about the UK. That, I mean, something interesting is happening in the UK in the last 20 years in politics, that the Labour Party was so successful. Well, if you pull back further, in the 80s, of course, the Conservatives were successful with the neoliberal approach, and Labour came in much like the Democrats came in under Clinton, and they just adopted the economic model of the Republicans and the Conservatives, but made it more friendly, with a bit more welfare around it. But then, of course, the Conservatives in the UK were out of power, and they thought, well, how do we get back into power? Well, we hug a hoodie, we adopt more a Labour kind of presentation. But what's happened on the Labour Party at the same time in the last 15 years is what I call the ideological gentrification of the left, where in the same way in a city that wealthy bankers in London will move into working class neighborhoods and push them out the city and price them out. What you've basically had is the Labour Party in the UK have been taken over by these technocratic elites, all very, all sort of Oxbridge-educated people like the Miliband brothers, and you end up with this indistinguishable parties. Really, they've all adopted each other's agendas, and I do think what we're seeing now is this technocratic consensus has become trapped in its own echo chamber, and kind of like when you put a picture into ChatGPT and then you put the same picture in again, it gets more and more corrupted as it goes along. The elites have, because they're only referencing their own technocratic frames of reference, it becomes more and more a caricature of what they're doing, and they don't even seem to see it. There's like this feedback loop. So I think it's becoming so absurd, it's becoming inevitable, certainly in the UK, that there'll be something else rising up. And we're seeing this in the fact that Reform is a legitimate party now. Whether they can organize themselves is a different question, but in terms of their popularity, they do seem to be the option that most people would turn to, and not simply as a protest vote. And so in terms of ranking countries, I'm not sure, but what I do think is there is a kind of wellspring happening throughout Europe of people waking up to realizing that none of the elite parties really represent them, that there is a lot of technocratic overreach. And I would say, as someone who's based in Hungary, I mean, I think Hungary has been trying to create an environment to bring people together to discuss these types of issues openly, and I think therefore, Hungary has its own view of some of these issues, but I do think that they've been quite involved in building the capacity or range for people to actually talk about these issues more critically. Thanks.
I can tell about Poland. So in Poland, we have, great ability of resistance, and we also have, as a society, we have expectations. So nowadays, of course, we have a government which would like to push the climate agenda forward, but they find some obstacles. First of all, we really push hard on keeping rights of the people. So there is, for example, when it comes to windmills, there is a regulation that prohibits companies from building windmills in a certain distance from houses, for example, and it's considerable. So it's that's the one thing. And on the other hand, there is an expectation. So we all know we will need electricity, we will need power. So there is high pressure on building a nuclear power plant. So basically, the current government was forced to launch a project, so initiated by the previous government, by Law and Justice government, to build a one big and some small power plants, nuclear power plants, because we know that we will need energy. People expect it, and our government needs to take it into account, and it really happens. So thankfully, we are on the more or less right path in that sense. So sorry for praising our own country once again, but
Understandable. Well, you're going to love to hear this then, because Donald Trump actually had. Did you want something to say on this? No. Okay, then you can go first here, because this is pretty good. So yeah, Trump said a lot of very, very interesting things that only Trump would say, and he called he called out what he called stupid people who support wind energy. Quote, China is smart. They make windmills, sell them for a fortune, and sell them to the stupid people that buy them. Windmills are all over Europe, all over the place, and they are losers. One thing I've learned, the more windmills a country has, the more money that country loses. China makes almost all the windmills, and yet I haven't been able to find any wind farms in China, unquote. So again, I'm going by the accuracy of Twitter, and I didn't even get a chance to watch the videos, but I trust Twitter now that Elon Musk runs it. Anyway, would anyone like to comment on Donald Trump's attitude toward wind power? Or are you just going to smile?
Well, the last remark that China is not building wind turbines, that's false.
Okay.
I think if you
I thought
fact check that, I think China is incredibly active on all kinds of energy. So they just build everything, So China is also the champion in solar and the champion in wind. But if you look at the percentages, it's still that coal, of course, is much bigger. But they are building everything. So he should go there, I think, Trump, and have a look for himself.
You can see all the coal plants out there too.
Well, that's the key. The percentages. China's a large company with a lot of large country with a lot of people with quite a bit of energy usage, and China utilizes more coal, probably. I'd have to double check that, but than any other country on the planet. China's electricity prices are lower than in the United States. So is Russia's. By comparison, Europe's electricity prices, although they vary by country, are anywhere from double to quadruple the electricity prices in the United States. And why is that? Because windmills are stupid, as Donald Trump said. So one of the points that I'll be making Friday when I discuss this very topic, there is peer-reviewed data. We get hit over the head with, peer-reviewed data, peer-reviewed data. Peer-reviewed study by energy economists looking into the comparative cost of electricity if you build out your grid on different energy sources, and looking at the most favorable circumstance, comparing in West Texas, which is quite sunny, quite southerly, and also quite windy and breezy. So this is renewable power generation heaven. Like, you don't get that kind of sunshine and wind in New Jersey. You don't get it in Michigan, even though that's where you have these facilities being built. You don't get it in Germany. But anyway, looking at those favorable conditions, comparing it to other energy sources, wind turbines, if you build out your wind turbines, peer-reviewed energy economist document versus natural gas, wind power is 7 times more expensive. Every unit, every percentage of your grid that you are building out with wind power, you are costing people 7 times more than they could, would, and should be paying utilizing natural gas. Coal power, nuclear power, hydropower, not quite as cheap as natural gas, but still extremely affordable. So Donald Trump, as brusque as he may be, he usually is right, and he's certainly right here.
Well, he pointed out in his remarks before you go, Colin, that he said here that, quote, the United States, this points to what you were talking about too, Marcel, the United States has avoided the catastrophic energy collapse, which failed every European nation that pursued the Green New Scam, as he calls it, perhaps the greatest hoax in history. So again, I find it remarkable that an American president is saying these things, but I enjoy it. Any comments you'd like to bring to it? Yes, sure.
Oh, no, I mean, I think he's loosely right. I mean, I think what people don't really factor in with some of these energy costs is the capital costs. And also, if you look at the wind power, I mean, how often it needs to be replaced before you even get to the other objections. I mean, in the north of England, where my parents live up in the Lake District, all the retired geography teachers always complaining about all the turbines being everywhere. But even before you get to kind of the aesthetic objection, the sort of NIMBYism of not in my backyard, if you actually start pricing it out, as you said, and you also take into account how often these things need to be replaced, and if you take away all the subsidies that are involved, is it really a profitable way of doing things? I mean, I do think there is a massive industry in generating, in making these turbines, which I think the Danish have benefited from. I mean, one of the major frustrations in the UK with the turbines we've built is, to the best of my knowledge, it's not being built by British firms, it's being built by Danish firms. And so there wasn't even any much profit to the UK in terms of building the things. But if someone wants to have an industry creating windmills to sell abroad, then that's a great industry if you can get it. Whether it's actually good for the consumer, I mean, that's an entirely different question. And I think I'd agree with you. I don't know the exact data on it, but I suspect you're right that it's 7 times more expensive. Certainly more expensive.
And I'm not done yet. So you hear, and pardon me for using a technical academic term here, but you hear these dumbasses out on the internet who say, oh, renewable power is already less expensive. It's already more affordable than wind and coal. And it's kind of like the polar bears and the coral. And you hear it all the time, so people think it's true when the facts are exactly the opposite. There's more coral in the Great Barrier Reef than ever has been recorded. There are more polar bears than's been the case since we've been counting them going back to the 1950s. So just because you hear it's already more affordable than coal and natural gas, don't buy it. Don't believe it. It's garbage. And again, I'm going to show you the definitive numbers and the proof of this on Friday. So when someone says that, say, oh yeah, what's your source? Because here's mine.
So maybe it is also worth to say how very often this windmill industry works as a vehicle to generate or to acquire money from governments, because you know that the very common business model for it is first to sign a provisory agreement with landowners and use it as a part of your capital, and go to the bank and go to the government and say, look, we have a pile of agreements. That's what we have. That's our part of with the investment. Now you can give us a credit, and that's the way these companies also generate. So actually take money from governments or from banks on very attractive conditions, and they use simply this power, this windmills, as a vehicle to generate income on the expense of the country and of people. So that's another. I'm simplifying the not being an economist, but that's the other issue, and that's because it would be really it's important to explain why we can call the windmill industry a scam, like Donald Trump is actually does. So there is a financial mechanism behind it that makes it look like this as well.
Go ahead, please.
I could add to that funny anecdote. A few years ago, I was interviewing for a YouTube channel. I was interviewing a lawyer, a Dutch lawyer, who is doing a lot of court cases defending citizens who will get windmills, wind turbines very close to their house. In Holland has the worst norms for how far from houses you can build wind turbines. That's incredible because, yeah, it's logical because Holland is so small and so densely populated. So if you want to build wind turbines, you need very, very loose norms, because otherwise, if you use, like, let's say 1 kilometer from houses, then you cannot build any windmills in the Netherlands. So this is the background. And during this interview, I remember that he said, the wind industry is about 3 things: money, money, money. And I will never forget this. But this is what's going on. And to add also that to James, that our grid operator now asks 200 billion euros from the Dutch government to extend the grid. And the only reason we have to extend the grid is the huge amount of solar and wind, all these peaks, in all these fluctuations in the production. That's the only reason. We ran Holland with 50 stations, power stations, coal and gas. Only 50 stations is running the Netherlands, and now we need 200 billion euros to expand the grid. It's incredible.
It was funny. I was going to ask. That's a fantastic segue of my own curiosity. I'd like to ask the panel, which European country has the best energy mix? In other words, how they get their energy. And what is there a country in Europe that is the model of the way they generate energy for their country? I know that France is heavily nuclear, but and Poland, I believe, is there's a lot of coal there. But is there a country that is ideal? And what is a good ideal energy mix policy look like in Europe?
Well, Europe is very diverse, to use that popular word. But the first country that comes up in my mind is Norway. So Norway is making lots of money with oil and gas, and they put it in a fund. So they have a wonderful welfare state because of all the profits from oil and gas. They have a lot of hydropower. And what they can do is that if Denmark has too much electricity and they fear a blackout almost, then Norway will say, well, if you pay us extra, we will take your electricity, and they will increase the level in the hydropower in the hydro lakes. Yeah, and then the next day, when the wind is gone and Denmark needs the electricity, they will generate the hydropower and will sell it back again to Denmark. So that's a brilliant system, I would say.
Yeah, it's important to keep in mind that the EU's tentacles are everywhere throughout Europe. So is there a nation in Europe that's doing it well? It's hard to do it well because the EU dictates to the various nations how they must comply with their net zero agendas and their climate goals. And so therefore it's difficult. Norway does it better than most. As you mentioned, Jim, France with its nuclear power is admirable, but most of the European nations, even those that have political governance by parties that are freedom oriented, don't have much of a choice. Not too long ago, I was speaking with let's say a very high up Polish governmental official, and we were talking energy policy. And Poland has so much coal, and they've been able to utilize that for inexpensive electricity for so long. It gives Poland a competitive advantage. However, Poland has rapidly been moving away from coal. And I spoke with this government official who agrees with us here at the World Prosperity Forum in terms of worldview. And I asked, why are you allowing this to happen? Do I need to come here more often and speak the truth? And he said, no, the problem is I and others like me in government fully understand that. We fully understand that as we move away from coal power, our electricity prices are rising. That's a fact. You look at any country in the world, and especially in Europe, where you have more wind and solar, you have much higher prices. Poland has been reducing coal power for wind and solar, and the prices have been going up. However, he said, we cannot challenge the European Union. It will be too costly for us. So this is having a tremendous negative impact on our economy, on our living standards, and yet going up against the European Union would be even more devastating for us, and that's the challenge.
So which country in Europe has the best energy policy overall? Norway? Is that going to be number one? It's pretty hard to beat that, I think.
I think Marcel's right on that. But again, which has the best, which is doing the best within the confines, which makes the best not nearly as good as it could be.
And we know who has the worst.
Well, Germany,
of course. Yes, ding, ding. Good. Good answer. You were paying attention today, James Taylor. Excellent. Anyone else? Okay. This is a statement by Belgian Prime Minister Bart de Wever. So you guys are getting this cold. We'll see what kind of reaction we get out of this. He says, quote, "We were used to very friendly presidents like Obama, and we did not, America's shift is not tied to one presidency, it's structural. America's focus has turned toward the Pacific and it's back toward the Atlantic, and this won't change after Trump. It's a structural shift. Regarding Russia, negotiating with Putin, in my opinion, is not a very good idea because as the Americans said, if you want to talk calmly, but carry a big stick. We don't have a big stick, and we can only speak softly." So that was the Belgian Prime Minister on, I guess, Trump's position on the global stage and how it really is not unique to him, but something that's been happening for years. I've never heard that perspective before, but any thoughts?
All right. Sorry to monopolize the answering of questions. So I hope others will weigh in as well. But yeah, of course, Europe and the globalists loved Barack Obama. I mean, he never stood up for America. When I was recently at a conference in Germany among people who are conservatives and who agree with me, someone after my talk, actually, I'm sorry, that this was a conference in Austria, but he was a German. And he said, I agree with you, but you Americans and Donald Trump, I don't like Donald Trump. And I realized that the European press paints Donald Trump the way the American press paints the conservative populist parties in Europe, as if this is, the spawn of Satan, the next fascist movement, whatever. But I asked him, I said, well, what don't you like about Donald Trump? And he said, he does not have Germany's best interests at heart. Well, he's not supposed to have Germany's best interests at heart. He's supposed to have Americans' best interests at heart. But the globalists, if you are globalist, if you're Barack Obama, if you're his intellectual hangers-on that then populated and ran the Biden administration, what you care about is being able to, when you go to Davos, have them talk so sweetly about you, and you get to be in the center of the picture if you're not wandering off into the jungle like Joe Biden did. But nevertheless, that's the difference. You can be popular, and you can have the Dutch prime minister or whoever it was say how wonderful you were because you didn't stand up for your country, and you let countries who are doing it wrong run the agenda. And it's wonderful that Donald Trump is challenging that. And I hope that that is a systemic change that will continue afterwards.
I think sometimes, obviously, things Trump say are pretty outrageous, but there's a strange kind of method in it, or at least there's a consequence of it that I think will be very good for Europe, is that sometimes I feel Europe, and I don't want to take this caricature too far, but it's kind of like the teenager who's never been forced to go out and get a job and wash up dishes because the parent will pay for everything and just keep them, keep buying them a new PlayStation the whole time and keep them coddled. And then one day, there's a divorce and a new dad shows up and he's a little bit tired. Right, you're going to go to work now. And I just think that that's kind of what's happening. And the kid doesn't like the new parent, but maybe 20 years later he says, that guy was a prick, but you know what? I did actually go get a job, and then I just stopped playing the PlayStation all day and I went out there and did things. And I don't want to draw it too far, but I do think that Europe's, this idea of speaking softly, and Europe has been speaking softly because they've not it's been a low gravity environment for Europe for so long under NATO with the Americans. I think the Europeans have not had to be more realistic about some of these things. I mean, in the Brits too, we totally folded up the military basically in the mid-90s because the Cold War was over. We couldn't budget for it anymore. And then we can do it because the Americans are still there spending massive amount of their the budget on the military. So I just think if Trump may be saying things that are outrageous, sometimes a bit crazy, but I think at the long term, if it causes Europeans to say, okay, we can't rely on them, we should rely on ourselves, whether witting or not, that's a good consequence, I think, for the continent.
I'm glad you didn't take that analogy too far. I wouldn't want to see where that would go. All right. And, this is the World Prosperity Forum, and there has been a lot of economic talk on here. And, it is hard to kind of just look at excerpts of those or snippets of what Trump said, because he tends to riff, as he calls it, and goes off on tangents. But he did speak, I think, this is a little bit about economics, and I think what he sees as maybe a unique American prosperity, or at least prosperity how he thinks it should be created. And he's talking a little bit here, I actually think, about his tariffs and about energy policy, which we definitely talked about the latter very much today. So he says, frankly, many parts of our world are being destroyed, and the leaders don't even understand what's happening. And the ones that do understand won't do anything to stop it. Could be talking about immigration now, too. Virtually all of the so-called experts predicted my plans to end this failed model would trigger a global recession and runaway inflation. We have proven them wrong. Many Western governments foolishly turned their backs on everything that makes nations rich, powerful, and strong. So I would ask the first one who can grab the microphone, what do they think? How much truth do you think there is in that notion by President Donald Trump?
I'll grab it if I must.
Please do.
Okay, you sure nobody else wants to weigh in first? All right, well, then again, you have much less exposure to President Trump than I do.
Hard to avoid.
There we go. What Joe Biden said and did not make headlines anywhere outside of, I don't know, well, not even Scranton, because it's been decades since he's been there. All right. Well, there's a lot there. And the economic policies of Donald Trump have largely been fantastic, especially the realization that energy is the lifeblood of our economy, of any economy. The cost of energy is a significant factor in every good and service bought, sold, traded in the economy. So if we are going to be just turning our backs on the economic realities of various energy sources and policies, we're going to have trouble. It's going to cost jobs and cause inflation. So I think the biggest factor, I mean, there's so many, but maybe it's just because that's my area of greatest interest, is energy policy. And Donald Trump has been fantastic, removing the shackles from conventional energy production. The cost of gasoline is down. I remember paying under Biden, I'd be paying often $4.50 a gallon. Now I'm paying, we have one of our speakers coming up on Friday who's holding up 6 because she's from California. But now I'm paying under 2.5. That makes a big difference for a family's standard of living. You take that over a full year, how much that costs, that's quite a bit. Electricity prices are harder because the changes that Biden instituted, with all of the impediments put in for conventional energy and all of the mandates, subsidies, inducements for wind and power, that wind and power is still on the grid. And then you have all the demand of AI data centers. But okay, the elephant in the room and the topic that, boy, I'd like to avoid, but it was asked. So tariffs as part of that. As a libertarian, by history, by training, I think I'm a bit of a libertarian and a conservative, maybe meshing those two together. But my libertarian instincts, my view of economics are that tariffs are not good. Donald Trump imposed those tariffs. Now, I think Donald Trump, he views himself as a master tactician and deal maker. When he looks at the trade deficit and sees a problem. I don't see a problem. I see more if there's a disparity in tariff rates, because we can be exporting products, we can be importing products. If consumers spend less money on those, that benefits consumers and living standards. So, okay, so the tariffs. If you impose a 10% tariff on the rest of the world, we, in the United States, we purchase 20% of our products are imports. So if none of those costs are passed along, or excuse me, if all of them are passed along to consumers, none are utilized and eaten by the producers overseas, that means, all right, 10% tariff on 20% of our products, that's 2% inflation above and beyond what we would otherwise expect. That is not a good thing. But of course, that's all other things being equal. I'm guessing that maybe half of those costs are being eaten by the producers overseas. So you're talking 1% above what would otherwise be the case. And if you have other policies across the board that are pro-growth, that are anti-inflationary, then you can see that the impact of tariff not even being noticed. You can see inflation going down, which indeed it has. The prediction was we're going to have massive inflation. It hasn't happened. Well, largely because the biggest inflationary pressure that we've seen in our generation was the Biden spending and economic policies. So ideally, would I like to see those tariffs imposed by Donald Trump? No. Have they been as bad as people have predicted? No. Overall, is Trump's economic policy more anti-inflationary and pro-growth than Joe Biden? Yes. And I may be wrong, but those are my personal views. And I think overall, this president is more pro-growth, more pro-American living standards than anyone in many, many years.
Can I say to that? I mean, I think there's a word apocalypse, which people who don't like Trump say, well, he's kind of an apocalyptic character. He's tearing everything up. I think people forget that the word apocalypse has two meanings. There's the modern meaning of cataclysm and the original meaning of revelation. And I do think that what Trump is, at the very least, is a revelation of the realities of things. So when he stress tests everything, sometimes he will stress test it to failure. Sometimes what he reveals, it was just an orthodoxy we had that was due to be stress tested. And I think one thing worth noting with Trump is that, you know, for me, what Trump is, he's a bonfire of all the vanities of the culture. And he's that entire sort of dry, dead wood of political correctness built up over decades. And not just political correctness in a kind of performative sense, but just orthodoxies about how everything should be run. He's blown through all of those things. But my point is this, that, you know, forest fires, to take this fire analogy, is that forest fires are actually natural. You know, they're part of nature. The problem is when there's so much dead wood built up that the bonfire becomes a conflagration and you burn down a city, right? I think what the lesson of Trump, and this is a kind of bipartisan view of Trump, I think the people who dislike Trump need to recognize there's use in a fire, because from fire a phoenix can rise. I don't know if Trump's a phoenix, but he's definitely the fire, and fire is useful. But here's the thing, but for people who love Trump, it's also to recognize that while a fire is natural and healthy, it can get out of control. And I personally, I think what he said to the Norwegian guy the other day is maybe a step too far. But so I just think when we look at the phenomenon of Trump, I don't think it's worth looking at Trump personally as a strategist. But he is an impulse, and I think he has a structural role in what's happening. And there is a necessity to burn a lot of dead wood off to have that type of forest fire. But I do think people who support what Trump is trying to do cannot simply say everything he does is great, because there's a slippery slope. I've spoken to people. I spoke to someone a few weeks ago who's a absolutely Trump guy, loves Trump, and I said, but you know, he's probably going to declare after he took Venezuela, he'll take Greenland next. He said, no, he will not. I can't imagine that happening, and I definitely wouldn't support it. 6 hours later, Trump tweeted about Greenland, and within 3 days, this friend of mine was saying, well, there's lots of reasons why this could happen. So it's kind of I do think we all need to be realistic about it. I mean, he's not omniscient. He may be omnipotent at this stage, and he's certainly omnipresent. But whether he's omniscient is different. So I just think that, anyway, sorry for the monologue there, but I do think that the way to see Trump is even, you know, he's certainly very revealing of the truth of things, because he's stress testing everything.
I think stress testing is such a fantastic analogy, because I think structures and relationships, international relationships, need stress tests once in a while.
And it is testing, and it is stressful, but nevertheless, here we are.
Just because he's testing that, just because he's conducting a stress test doesn't mean he wants it to fall down. He wants to, the other part of that is to see, is it still strong enough to stand?
So to add to that, I don't know if Trump himself has that view, but I do think structurally that's the way we ought to view him, I think.
Anyone else on any of that? All right, that does actually, we're just up out of time. So that's going to do it for today's 3-hour live stream of day 3 of 5 of the World Prosperity Forum live from Zurich, Switzerland. I want to thank everybody who is watching here online, everybody in the room we have here in a undisclosed location somewhere in Zurich with an umlaut, Switzerland. I want to thank our panel and our speakers today, Thomas Obziansky, Marus Zagorski, Marcel Kroc from Clintel, Callum Nicholson from the Danube Institute, and of course, Heartland Institute President James Taylor. I think it was a very informative and even fun afternoon today. And we will see you again tomorrow, where we broadcast live every day, every day this week. That is 3 p.m. Central European Time, 9 a.m. Eastern Time, back in America. See you next time. Bye-bye.